Mission Statement. Founded in 2008, the Zeitgeist movement, TZM, is a sustainability and public health advocacy organization. It conducts research and activism through a network of regional chapters, public events, and various forms of educational media. The focus includes recognizing that the majority of the modern world's social problems, including mounting ecological crises and destabilizing economic inequality, oppression, poverty, conflict, corruption, etc., is not an inevitable outcome of our civilization. Rather, TZM sees these issues as consequential symptoms of an outdated social system. While common reforms and general community support to improve conditions are of interest to TZM, working to galvanize the population in a move to change the very nature of our social system itself is the goal. In this, a central criticism has been in addressing the inefficient nature of market-based economics or capitalism itself. TZM concludes that without a dramatic move away from the incentives and structural dynamics of the market system, there is little hope today for further, relevant improvements in the areas of human rights, ecological sustainability, and general public health. Supporters refer to the model promoted by TZM as a post-scarcity economy. This model is inferential, derived from modern principles of scientific, sustainable earthly management, along with contemporary findings in social and epidemiological research. TZM's interest in change is global. It has no allegiance to country or traditional political platforms. It views the world as a single system and the human species as a single family. It recognizes that all countries must disarm and learn to share resources and ideas if we expect to survive in the long run. Self-interest must become social interest, and the solutions arrived at and promoted are in the interest to help every human being. What does the word zeitgeist stand for, and how does it fit in the movement? The term zeitgeist can be defined as the general intellectual, moral, and cultural climate of an era. The term movement implies motion and change. Therefore, the Zeitgeist movement can be seen as a social movement that urges change in the dominant intellectual, moral, and cultural climate of the time. What is the basic structure of the movement? The Zeitgeist movement structure is comprised of volunteers creating a global communications network for activism that is focused on the educational imperatives of a new socio-economic model, referred to as a post-scarcity economy. A more formal affiliation is attained by an individual's involvement in the movement via teams/branches, usually comprised of city, state, or national level groups. While the movement is global, branches are what comprise the local on-the-ground presence of the Zeitgeist movement in their respective community or region. How does TZM view our major social problems today? TZM is different from most activist communities and political/social movements in the world today, due to the way we view the majority of the societal problems and their causes. We see it as structural. In short, the socio-economic system itself is regarded as the root cause of persistent negative societal outcomes, with human behavior and its resulting effects, corruption, pollution, wars, waste, exploitation, and hence, distortion of values in psychology, seen as symptoms of this fundamental root source. Which current issues does the movement focus on? General observations. In the view of the movement, the society today has become increasingly detached from the physical world, with techniques of production, distribution, and social ordering that have little to no relationship to the environment or the current state of scientific knowledge with respect to public health and sustainability. Cyclical consumption. For instance, our use of a profit-based, growth-driven monetary system has become one of the greatest destroyers of the natural world and sustainable human values. The entire global economy requires cyclical consumption to operate, which means that money must constantly be circulating. Thus, new goods and services must be constantly introduced regardless of the state of the environment and actual human necessity. This perpetual approach has a fatal flaw. For resources as we know it are simply not infinite. Resources are finite and the earth is essentially a closed system. To assume the need for constant consumption to keep people employed, and hence the market system going, is ecocidal on a finite planet. The true goal of an economy, by definition, is to strategically preserve and create efficiency. The system today demands the opposite: infinite growth. The monetary market model is based upon money being treated as a commodity and its origination from debt, sold for interest income. This is a Ponzi scheme. Each time this commodity money is sold, bank loans, it needs to be paid back debt, with more money charged as a fee for profit, interest. The problem is that the interest value required to settle the debt does not exist in the money supply outright. In other words, bankruptcy and default are not byproducts. They are inevitable, as there is always more debt outstanding than money in existence. This creates severe, offset monetary scarcity that oppresses many people on many levels. The value of scarcity. Likewise, the intents inherent within the monetary system derive a strategic edge from scarcity. This means that depleted resources are actually a positive thing for industry in the short term, for more money can be made off each respective unit. This is contextual to the monetary law of supply and demand and hence value in economics. It creates a perverse reinforcement to ignore environmental problems and the negative consequences that create scarcity, not to mention reinforcing technically unnecessary human deprivation. This system cannot meet the needs of the many because it isn't financially efficient to do so. Problem/inefficiency equals profit. Similarly, the system also requires problem/constant consumer interest in order to work. The more people who have cancer or cars that break down, the better the economy due to the servicing of those problems. Needless to say, this also generates an inherent disregard for human well-being and the environment. Sustainability, efficiency, and preservation are the enemies of this model. Cost efficiency and irresponsible obsolescence. There is also the cost efficiency mechanism that demands cutting expenses to remain competitive in the marketplace. Every single product created by a corporation today is immediately inferior by design, for the market requirement to cut creation costs in favor of lowering the output purchase price to maintain a competitive edge automatically reduces the quality of any given item by default. It is impossible to create the strategically best/long-lasting anything in our society, which translates into outrageous amounts of wasted resources and time. Likewise, this same mechanism is reinforcing the environmental disregard, depletion, and pollution that we see as a constant in the world today, among other issues. Waste and oppression of the human resource. As far as occupations today, we need to ask ourselves what the point is of a given focus and why it is necessary. The fact is, most jobs today are not directly related to the actual necessities of life. Rather, most are artificial concoctions created in order to keep people employed, so they can maintain purchasing power in an environment where our technology continues to expand exponentially, displacing humans from the production force. It is a common statement in politics today to hear about creating jobs. Well, in theory, an occupation could be created where people are paid to sit in a room and test chewing gum all day, every day. But is that a viable use of the human mind? Should we relegate our mental capacity to simple any so-called job due to mere economic reasons, regardless of what it actually contributes to personal and/or social development? This becomes even more bizarre as a train of reason when we realize that mechanization not only frees us from labor, but is actually more efficient and productive due to the exponential advancement of science and technology. On a different level, the very reality that each human being is required to be put in a position of servitude to a corporation or client in order to gain income to purchase the necessities of life not only perpetuates the waste of the human mind and human life, it is also a form of oppression slavery. If we combine the aforementioned infinite growth point above regarding the debt pressure that is built into this system, we see that the combination of the guaranteed debt imbalance and the requirement to submit to labor, regardless of its purpose/effect, in order to gain monetary income to survival, is a structural form of oppression against the lower classes, who hold the most debt and need for more periodic income. As noted, advancements in science and technology have shown that we can automate a great deal. The more we have applied mechanization to labor, the more productive things have become. Therefore, it is not only negligent for us to waste our lives waiting tables, working at a bus station, fixing cars, or other repetitive, monotonous jobs, it is also entirely irresponsible for us not to apply modern mechanization techniques to all industries where it is possible, for apart from strategic resource management, this is a powerful way to achieve balance and abundance for all the world's people, thus reducing crime-generating imbalances. The fact is, the market system cannot maintain itself with any viable integrity anymore, for corporations will continue to save money through automation, displacing human labor, which also displaces purchasing power, continuing the inevitable loss of growth that defines this system. In the end, today's society now has access to highly advanced technologies, and can easily provide more than enough for all of the Earth's people. This is possible through the implementation of an economy based on scientific resource management and applying modern methods. This is the purpose of the Zeitgeist movement, to create a global awareness to thus transition into a new, sustainable direction for humanity as a whole. How does TZM view the solutions to our major social problems today? It appears that most solutions offered in the world today are framed within the current social order of monetary practice. For example, there are over 1 billion people starving in the world, and the most common solutions sought tend to utilize money in some fashion to enable the resources needed. TZM takes a very different view. Rather than take each problem on a per-case basis and work to solve that problem within the confines of the customarily accepted system, a system that might, in fact, be creating the problem itself, TZM steps back to consider the inherent logic of the issues themselves and how they relate to the emerging scientific benchmark with respect to the scientific method, which tends to go outside of social tradition and custom. In the case of 1 billion people starving, the solution does not rest with the need for more donations, more governmental subsidies, or even legislation to limit possible causal abuse and exploitation of such regions, as those are not direct solutions since they do not relate to the mechanics of survival. Rather, they relate and intermediate with current social customs. The real issue and hence logic is technical, not political or financial. Starvation is a technical problem when clean, life-supporting resources are not made available to a certain region for some reason. The question is then asked, is there an empirical environmental restriction which is making those resources unavailable? The answer today is clearly no. It is well noted by the WHO and others that there is plenty of food being produced in the world to feed everyone, and we also have clear technical means to also desalinate and clean polluted water to make it safe for drinking. This can be done on an industrial scale. The financial approach clearly has an inherent flaw which is not enabling these basic life-supporting attributes and resources to be made available to 1 billion people. It is economically inefficient when considering the true sense of the definition of economics. The technical approach, which proves that these things are indeed possible where no one would ever have to starve, says, if it is possible to do it, then we need to simply figure out a new way to do it and bypass the current social custom if need be. As is common within much of the Zeitgeist movement materials, we see the financial structure as a whole as being a foundational cause of most of the world's issues, with the technical reality of what is possible as an approach to the solution. It is based upon scientific causality, not financial causality. In a world of extreme advancement in information and mechanical technology, the great realization is that we can do much more than ever to meet the needs of the human population, along with generating a logic where most of the environmental and social issues we face today would be gone tomorrow if we simply applied our updated understandings now. How is the Zeitgeist movement organized? While you may find lecturers, chapter coordinators, or other notable members in TZM, all participation is voluntary, with supporters and advocates acting independently as individuals while adhering to a simple set of guidelines. The intention is to create an equally advanced level of understanding within each community, so that TZM advocates can take strides on their own. The chapter structure is viewed as holographic, meaning that the integrity and understanding of each regional group mirrors that of the other. In the view of the movement, there is nothing more powerful than a group of people who share an idea and can each logically deduce, in tandem, a sympathetic method of conduct worldwide. Who funds the Zeitgeist movement? The movement operates on a non-profit and volunteer basis, autonomously. Activists themselves donate personal resources or seek financial help on a per-project basis to accomplish local activism or cover the cost of materials, etc. However, if you would like to make donations to TZM, you can donate to your local branch. Some, like TZM Finland and TZM Iceland, have an associated NPO, non-profit org. What is Zeitgeist Day? Zeitgeist Day, or Z-Day for short, is a global annual event day which occurs in the middle of March each year. The goal is to increase public awareness of the Zeitgeist movement. The first official Z-Day took place in 2009. These events were well documented by news agencies across the world, including the New York Times in America. An archive list of those events can be found on the zdayglobal.org site. The 2010 Z-Day had 330 sympathetic events occur in over 70 countries worldwide. These events were also well documented by news agencies across the world, including the Huffington Post in America. A Zeitgeist Day event can take on many forms, ranging from a simple showing of DVD media to full lectures or interactive question and answer events with event organizers in various regions. What is the Zeitgeist Media Festival? Recognizing the power of art and media to help change the world, the Zeitgeist Media Festival is an annual worldwide arts festival that occurs late each summer. The idea is to engage the artistic community and their power to change its values. It proposes that needed changes in the structural/economic workings of society can only manifest in tandem with the personal/social transformation of values in each of us. While intellectual knowledge serves its role of showing the path, many in the world follow their feelings, not knowledge. The Zeitgeist Media Festival works to bridge those levels, while also illuminating a focus where improving the world is no longer considered a fringe or even dangerous pursuit, but rather the highest and most honorable level of personal/social integrity we have. The Zeitgeist Media Festival also globally works with local food drives to directly help the many homeless and suffering. Is the Zeitgeist movement related to Peter Joseph's film series? No. The Zeitgeist documentary series was the inspiration for the Zeitgeist movement, due to their popularity and overall message of seeking truth, peace, and sustainability in society. While the word Zeitgeist is associated with Peter Joseph's film series, Zeitgeist, the movie, Zeitgeist Addendum, and Zeitgeist Moving Forward, these films are personal artistic expressions of the filmmaker himself, with the call to found a global movement at the end of documentary Zeitgeist Addendum. How do I learn about TZM in detail? Aside from numerous global lectures that can be found online and via our YouTube channel, there is a 320-page book, TZM Defined, available for free in PDF form on this site. That is the most in-depth written work regarding the movement's train of thought. This work is also being sold at cost in paperback form, either from via Amazon or Bookpatch. How to connect to TZM's online voice chat? Discord? The Zeitgeist movement has a Discord server organized with many chat rooms to enable discussions and voice chats for the whole movement. Please download and install the Discord software, then go to link https://discord.gg/ukvwqz. About a post-scarcity economy. What are some of the central characteristics of the solution proposed? Automation of labor. As the trend of what appears to be an exponential increase in the evolution of information technology, robotics, and computerization continues, it is apparent that human labor is becoming more and more inefficient in regard to meeting the demands necessary for supporting the global population. From the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we have seen an increasing trend toward technological unemployment, which is the phenomenon where humans are replaced by machines in the workforce. This trend, while debatable in regard to its ultimate long-term effect on employment, creates a propensity to displace the worker and hence the consumer, slowing consumption. That stated, this issue is actually overshadowed by a larger social imperative, that the use of machine labor mechanization is provably more efficient than human performance in virtually all sectors. For example, if one was to track the performance output of factory production within the U.S. steel industry for the past 200 years, we find that not only do less than 5% of the workforce now work in such factories, the efficiency and output capacities have increased substantially. The trend, in fact, now shows that employment is inverse to productivity. The more mechanization occurs, the more productive an industry becomes. Today, there are repetitive occupations which simply do not need to exist given the state of automation and computerization, cybernation. Not only would mechanization in these areas reduce the mundane burden and allow more free time for people, it also would, more importantly, increase productivity. Machines do not need breaks, vacations, sleep, etc. The use of mechanization on its own means to create many forms of abundance on this planet, from food to physical goods. However, to do this, the traditional labor system we have simply cannot exist. The reality is that our labor for income system is stifling progress in its requirement to keep people working for the sake of economic stability. We are reaching a stage where the efficiency of automation is overriding and making obsolete the system of labor for income. This trend shows no sign of slowing, especially in regard to the now dominant service industry, which is increasingly being automated in the form of kiosks, robotics, and other forms. Likewise, due to phenomena related to Moore's law and the growing inexpense of computers and machines, it is likely that it is simply a matter of time before corporations simply can no longer rationalize keeping human labor anymore, as the automation systems will become too cheap. Of course, this is a paradoxical market phenomenon, called by some theorists as the contradiction of capitalism, for it is, in effect, removing the consumer laborer itself and hence reducing consumption. Apart from those issues, it is important to also consider human labor contributions based on social relevance, not monetary gain. In a post-scarcity economy, there would be no reason to have occupations such as banking, trading, insurance, cashiers, brokers, advertising, or anything related to the governance of money. All human actions in the form of institutionalized labor should also have the highest social return. There is no logic in wasting resources, time, and energy on operations that do not have a direct and tangible function. This adjustment alone would remove millions of jobs, for the idea of working for money as a purpose would no longer exist. In turn, all the poor demographic, shoddy goods, vanity items, and culturally contrived creations designed to influence people for reasons of status, for the sole sake of profit, would also no longer exist, saving countless amounts of time and resources. One final note on this issue. Some hear this and they assume that this voids the communicative arts and personal and social expression as far as painting, sculpture, music, and the like. No, these mediums of expression will likely thrive like never before, for the amount of free time made available to people will permit a renaissance of creativity and invention, along with community and social capital. The elimination of the burden of labor obligation will also reduce stress and create a more amiable culture. There is a difference between creating for the sake of keeping society sustainable and efficient, focusing on resource preservation, product efficiency, and strategic allocation of labor for those things which generate a tangible social return, versus creating for personal expression, exploration, experimentation, and hence art, which has been a staple of human evolution since the dawn of time. Access over property. The concept of property, unannounced to most people today, is a fairly new social concept. Before the Neolithic Revolution, as extrapolated from current hunter and gatherer societies existing today, property relationships did not exist as we know them. Neither did money or even trade in many cases. Communities existed in an egalitarian fashion, living within the carrying capacity of their regions and the natural production built in. It was only after direct agricultural development was discovered, eventually proceeding with resource acquisition by ship traders and the like up to modern-day power establishments and corporations, that property became a highly defined staple of society as we know it today. With that understood, which dismisses the common notion that property is a result of some kind of empirical human nature, the notion of no property is also today often blindly associated with communism and the works of Karl Marx. It is important to point out TZM's advocacy of no property is derived from logical inference, based almost explicitly upon strategic resource management and efficiency, rather than any surface influence by these supposed communist ideals. There is no relation between the two, for communism was not derived from the needs to preserve and manage resources efficiently. Communism, in theory and practice, was based on a social/moral relativism which was culturally specific, not environmentally specific, which is the case with a post-scarcity economy. The real issue relevant to meeting human needs is not ownership. It is access. People use things, they do not own them. Ownership is a non-operational, protectionist advent, derived from generations of scarcity over resources, currently compounded by market-based advertising, which supports status/class division for the sake of monetary gain. To put it another way, ownership is a form of controlled restriction, both physically and ideologically. Property as a system of controlled restriction, coupled with the monetary value inherent, and hence the market consequences, is unsustainable, limiting, and impractical. In a post-scarcity economy model, the focus moves from static ownership to strategic access, with a system designed for society to obtain access as needed. For example, rather than owning various forms of recreational sporting equipment, access centers are set up, typically in regions where such actions occur, where a person simply checks out the equipment, uses it for as long as they want, and then returns it. This library-type arrangement can be applied to virtually any type of human need. Of course, those reading this who have been conditioned into a more individualistic, materialistic mindset often objects with claims such as, What if I want green, custom golf clubs, but only white are available? This is a culturally contrived, biased reservation. The issue in question is utility, not vanity. Human expression has been molded by the needs of the current market-based system, consumption, into values which are simply non-functional and irrelevant. Yes, this would require a value adjustment to quality rather than identity. The fact is, even for those who object from the standpoint of their interest in personal identity, the overarching social ramifications of such an social approach will create benefits that will greatly overshadow any such arbitrary personal preference, creating new values to replace the outdated ones. These include a no property crime. In a world of access rather than ownership, and without money, there is no incentive to steal, for there is no resale value. You cannot steal something that no one owns, and you certainly couldn't sell it. B. Access abundance. It has been denoted that the average automobile sits in parking spaces for the majority of its lifespan, wasting space and time. Rather than having this wasteful consequence of the ownership system, one car could facilitate a large number of users in a given region, with only a fraction of the production/resources needed. See peak efficiency of production. Unlike today, where the market system must perpetuate inherently inferior products for the sake of economic turnover, we could actually design goods to last, using the best materials and processes strategically available. We no longer make cheap products to serve a poor demographic, which is the majority. This attribute alone will save cataclysmic amounts of resources, while also enabling a society to have access to goods and services that they would never have had in a world based on money, inherent obsolescence, and property. Self-contained/localized city and production systems. There are many brilliant engineers who have worked to tackle the issue of industrial design, from Jacques Fresco to our Buckminster Fuller to Nikola Tesla. Behind such designs, such as Jacques Fresco's famed circular cities or Fuller's geodesic domes, rests a basic train of thought: strategic efficiency and maximization of productivity. For example, Fresco's circular city is constructed of a series of belts, each serving a social function such as energy production, research, recreation, living, etc. Each city is a Hensa system, where all needs are produced within the city complex, in a localized fashion whenever possible. For example, renewable energy generation occurs near the outer perimeter. Food production is produced closer to the middle within industrial-sized greenhouses. This is very different in its logic from the globalization-based economy we live in today, which wastes outrageous amounts of energy and resources due to unneeded transport and labor processing. Likewise, transportation within the circular cities is strategically created to eliminate the use of detached automobiles, except for rare cases such as emergency vehicles. Homes are created to be microsystems as well, with much power generation occurring internally, such as from sunlight absorbed by the building structure using photovoltaic technology. More information on these city systems can be found at https://www.tchivinusproject.com. The geodesic dome, perfected by Buckminster Fuller, offers another efficiency-oriented medium within a similar train of thought. Fuller's goal was to build designs to do more with fewer resources. He noticed problems inherent in conventional construction techniques and recognized the indigenous strength of naturally occurring structures. The advantages include a much stronger structure than a conventional building while using less material to construct. Domes can be built very quickly because they are of a modular prefab construction and suit being mass-produced. They also use less energy to keep warm/cool than a conventional box structure. More information can be found at http://www.bfi.org. In the end, the fundamental interest is, again, sustainability and efficiency on all levels, from the housing design to the earth design. The market system actually fights this efficiency due to the broken, competitive nature inherent. Technological unification of Earth via systems approach. We live in a symbiotic/synergistic planetary ecosystem, with a cause-effect balance reflecting a single system of earthy operation. Buckminster Fuller defined this well when he referred to the planet as Spaceship Earth. It is time we reflect this natural state of affairs in our societal affairs on this planet. The fact of the matter is that human societies, which are dispersed across the globe, require resources which are also ununiformly dispersed across the globe. Our current procedure for enabling resource distribution comes in the form of corporations which seek and claim ownership of our earthly resources, which they in turn sell to others in the name of profit. The problems inherent in this practice are numerous, again due to the self-interest-based disposition inherent in selling anything for personal gain, as denoted above. But in the larger scheme of things, this is only partially the issue when it comes to the reality that we live on a finite planet, and where resource management and preservation should be the number one concern in regard to human survival, especially with the population explosion of the last 200 years. 2 people are born every second on this planet, and each one of those humans needs a lifetime of food, energy, water, and the like. Given this fundamental need to understand what we have, the rates of depletion, and, invariably, the need to streamline industry in the most efficient, productive way, a global system of resource management must be put in place. It is just common sense. This is an extensive subject when one considers the technical, quantitative variables needed for implementation. However, for the sake of overview, it can be stated that the first step is a full global survey of all earthly resources. Then, based on a quantitative analysis of the properties of each material, a strategically defined process of production is constructed from the bottom up, using such variables as negative retroactions, renewability, etc. More on this can be found in the section called Project Earth in the ZM lecture called, Where Are We Going? Then consumption statistics are accessed, rates of depletion become monitored, distribution is logically formulated, etc. In other words, it is a full systems approach to earthly resource management, production, and distribution, with the goal of absolute efficiency, conservation, and sustainability. Given the mathematically defined attributes as based on all available information at the time, along with the state of technology at the time, the parameters for social operation within the industrial complex become self-evident, with decisions arrived at by way of computation, not human opinion. This is where computer intelligence becomes an important tool for social governance, for only the computation ability/programming of computers can access and strategically regulate such processes efficiently and in real time. This technological application is not novel. It is simply scaled out from current methods already known. The scientific method as the methodology for governance. The application of the scientific method for social concern is an oft-repeated mantra for the basis of social operation in a post-scarcity economy model. While the obviousness of this in regard to industry is simple enough to understand, it is important to also realize its value in regard to human behavior. Science, historically speaking, has often been derailed as a cold, restrictive discipline, reserved for the sake of mere technology and invention. Little regard seems to be currently given to its use in the understanding of human behavior. Superstitious thought, which has been powerfully dominant in human evolution, has worked on the basis that the human being was somehow detached from the physical world. We have souls, spirits, we are divine. We are related/guided by an all-seeing, all-knowing, controlling God, etc. Conversely, yet oddly similar, there is an argument that humans have free will in their decisions and that we have the open ability to choose our actions, absent of the influence of our environment or even education. Now, while the vastness of the prior 2 statements and many reading those could find numerous cultural arguments to claim the contrary, this doesn't change the basic reality that we humans have historically liked to think that we are special and unique from the rest of the organisms and natural phenomena around us. However, as time has gone on, it has become increasingly obvious that we are not special, and that there is no such thing as special in the natural world, for everything is special based on the uniqueness of all organisms. There is no reason to assume the human being is any more important or intrinsically different or special than a mole, a tree, an ant, a leaf, or a cancer cell. This isn't New Age rhetoric. It is fundamental logic. We are physical phenomena, nothing more or less. We are greatly influenced by our culture, and our values and behaviors can only mostly be a result of our conditioning, as external phenomena interacts with our genetic predispositions. For example, we have a notion called talent, which is another word for a genetic predisposition to a given behavior, or set of behaviors. A piano prodigy might have an inherent ability that enables them to learn more quickly and perform in a more acute way than another, who has spent the same time in practice, but doesn't have the genetic predisposition. Be that as it may, that talented person still had to learn what a piano was and how to play it. In other words, genes are not autonomous initiators of commands. It takes an environmental trigger to allow for the propensity to materialize. At any rate, it is not the point of this article to expand on the argument of nature and nurture. The point is that we have proven to be scientifically defined and a product of a traceable causality, and it is this understanding that can allow us to slow and even stop the aberrant or criminal behavior we see in society today, such as abuse, murder, theft, and the like. The logic, once the effects of human conditioning are understood, is to remove the environmental attributes which are enabling the reactions. Just as an abused dog who has been starved for a week might have a knee-jerk reaction to react very violently to an otherwise innocuous passerby, we humans have the same behavior dynamic. If you don't want people to steal food, do not deprive them of it. It has been found that prisons are now generating more violence than they are curbing. If you teach a child to be a hateful racist, then he will carry those values into the rest of his life very often. Human values and hence human behavior are shaped by the environment in a cause and effect-based way, no different than a leaf being blown by the wind. In a post-scarcity economy model, the central focus in regard to removing aberrant human actions is not to punish them, but to find the reasons for their offensive actions and work to eliminate them. Humans are products of their environment, and personal/social reform is a scientific process. Moving away from money and markets. Market theory assumes a number of things which have proven to either be false, marginally beneficial, or outright socially detrimental. The core problems to consider are the following. The need for infinite growth, which is mathematically unsustainable and ecologically detrimental. The entire basis of the market system is not the intelligent management of our mostly finite resources on this planet, but rather the perpetual extraction and consumption of them for the sake of profit and economic growth. In order to keep people employed, people must constantly consume, regardless of the state of affairs within the environment, and often regardless of product utility. This is the absolute reverse of what a sustainable practice would require, which is the strategic preservation and efficient use of resources. B. A corruption-generating incentive system. It is often said that the competitive marketplace creates the incentive to act for the sake of social progress. While this is partially true, it also generates an equal if not more pronounced amount of corruption in the form of planned obsolescence, common crime, wars, large-scale financial fraud, labor exploitation, and many other issues. The vast majority of people in prison today are there because of monetary-related crime or nonviolent drug offenses. The majority of legislation exists in the context of monetary-based crimes. Also, if one was to critically examine history and peer into the documented biographies/mentalities of the greatest scientists and inventors of our time, such as Tesla, Einstein, Bell, the Wright brothers, and many others, it is found that they did not find their motivation in the prospect of monetary gain. The interest to make money must not be confused with the interest to create socially beneficial products, and very often they are even at odds. C. A disjunct, inefficient industrial complex which wastes tremendous amount of resources and energy. In the world today, with the advent of globalization, it has become more profitable to import and export both labor and goods across the globe rather than to produce locally. We import bananas from Ecuador to the US and bottled water from Fuji, Japan, while Western companies will go to the deprived third world to exploit cheap labor, etc. Likewise, the process of extraction to component generation to assembly to distribution of a given good might cross through multiple countries for a single final product, simply due to labor and production costs/property costs. This cost efficiency generates extreme technical inefficiency and is only justifiable within the market system for the sake of saving money. In a post-scarcity economy model, the focus is maximum technical efficiency. The production process is not dispersed but made as centralized and fluid as possible, with elements moving the very least amount, saving what would be tremendous amounts of energy and labor as compared to methods today. Food is grown locally whenever possible, which is most of the time given the flexibility of indoor agriculture technology today, while all extraction, production, and distribution is logically organized to use as little labor/transport/space as possible while producing the strategically best possible goods. See more below. In other words, the system is planned to maximize efficiently and minimize waste. D. A propensity for establishments. Very simply, established corporate/financial orders have a built-in tendency to stop new, Socially positive advents from coming to fruition if there is a foreshadowed loss of market share, profit, and hence power. It is important to consider the basic nature of a corporation and its inherent need for self-perpetuation. If a person starts a company, hires employees, creates a market, and becomes profitable, what has thus been created, in part, is the means for survival for a group of people. Since each person in that group typically becomes dependent on that organization for income, a natural protectionist propensity is created, whereas anything that threatens the institution thus threatens the well-being of the group/individual. This is the fabric of a competition mindset. While people think of free market competition as a battle between two or more companies in a given industry, they often miss the other level, the competition against new advents which would make them obsolete outright. The best way to expand on this point is to simply give an example, such as the US government and big oil collusion to limit the expansion of the fully electric car (EV) in the US. This issue was well presented and sourced in the documentary called Who Killed the Electric Car? The bottom line here is that the need to preserve an established order for the sake of the well-being of those on the payroll leads to an inherent tendency to stifle progress. A new technology which can make a prior technology obsolete will be met with resistance unless there is a way for the market system to absorb it in a slow fashion, allowing for a transition for the corporations, i.e. the perpetuation of hybrid cars in the US, as opposed to the fully electric ones which could exist now in abundance. There is also a large amount of evidence that the FDA has engaged in favoritism/collusion with pharmaceutical companies to limit/stop the availability of advanced progressive drugs, which would void existing/profitable ones. In a post-scarcity economy model, there is nothing to hold back developmental/implementation of anything. If safe and useful, it would immediately be implemented into society, with no monetary institution to thwart the change due to their self-preserving monetary nature. An inherent obsolescence which creates inferior products immediately due to the need to stay competitive. This little recognized attribute of production is another example of the waste which is created in the market system. It is bad enough that multiple companies constantly duplicate each other's items in an attempt to make their variations more interesting for the sake of public consumption, but a more wasteful reality is that, due to the competitive basis of the system, it is a mathematical certainty that every good produced is immediately inferior the moment it is created, due to the need to cut the initial cost basis of production and hence stay competitive against another company, which is doing the same thing for the same reason. The old free market adage where producers create the best possible goods at the lowest possible prices is a needlessly wasteful fantasy and detrimentally misleading, for it is impossible for a company to use the most efficient material or processes in the production of anything, as it would be too expensive to maintain a competitive cost basis. They very simply cannot make the strategically best physically. It is mathematically impossible. If they did, no one would buy it, for it would be unaffordable due to the values inherent in the higher quality materials and methods. Remember, people buy what they can afford to. Every person on this planet has a built-in limit of affordability in the monetary system, so it generates a feedback loop of constant waste via inferior production to meet inferior demand. In a post-scarcity economy model, goods are created to last, with the expansion and updating of certain goods built directly into the design, and with recycling strategically accessed as well, limiting waste. You will notice the term strategically best was used in a statement above. This qualification means that goods are created with respect to the state of affairs of planetary resources, with the quality of materials used based on an equation taking into account all relevant attributes, rates of depletion, negative retroactions, and the like. In other words, we would not blindly use titanium for, say, every single computer enclosure made, just because it might be the strongest materials for the job. That narrow practice could lead to depletion. Rather, there would be a gradient of material quality which would be accessed through analysis of relevant attributes, such as comparable resources, rates of natural obsolescence for a given item, statistical usage in the community, etc. These properties and relationships could be assessed through programming, with the most strategically viable solution computed and output in real time. It is mere issue of calculation. A propensity for monopoly and cartel, due to the basic motivation of growth and increased market share. This is a point that economic theorists will often deny under the assumption that open competition is self-regulating, and that monopolies and cartels are extremely rare anomalies in a free market system. This invisible hand assumption holds little validity, historically, not to mention the outstanding legislation around the issue which proves its infeasibility. In America, there have been numerous monopolies such as Standard Oil and Microsoft. Cartels, which are essentially monopolies by way of collusion between the largest competitors in an industry, are also persistent to this day, although perhaps less obvious to the casual observer. In any case, the free market itself does not resolve these issues. It always takes the government to step in and break up the monopolies. This aside, the more important point is that in an economy based on growth, it is only natural for a corporation to want to expand and hence dominate. After all, that is the basis of economic stability in the modern world: expansion. Expansion of any corporation always gravitates toward monopoly or cartel, for, again, the basic drive of competition is to outdo your competitor. In other words, monopoly and cartel are absolutely natural in the competitive system. In fact, it is inevitable, for again, the very basis is to seek dominance over market share. The true detriment of this reality goes back to the point above, the inherent propensity of an establishment to preserve its institution. If a medical cartel is influencing the FDA, then new ideas which void that cartel's income sources will often be fought, regardless of the social benefits being thwarted. The market system is driven in part by scarcity. The less there is of something, the more money that can be generated in the short term. This sets up a propensity for corporations to limit availability, and hence deny production abundance. It is simply against the very nature of what drives demand to create abundance. The Kimberley diamond mines in Africa have been documented in the past to burn diamonds in order to keep prices high. Diamonds are rare resources which take billions of years to be created. This is nothing but problematic. The world we live in should be based on the interest to generate an abundance for the world's people, along with strategic preservation and streamlined methods to enable that abundance. This is a central reason why, as of 2010, there are over 1 billion people starving on the planet. It has nothing to do with an inability to produce food, and everything having to do with an inherent need to create/preserve scarcity for the sake of short-term profits. Abundance, efficiency, and sustainability are, very simply, the enemies of profit. This scarcity logic also applies to the quality of goods. The idea of creating something that could last, say, a lifetime with little repair, is anathema to the market system, for it reduces consumption rates, which slows growth and creates systemic repercussions, loss of jobs, etc. The scarcity attribute of the market system is nothing but detrimental for these reasons. Not to mention that it doesn't even serve the role of efficient resource preservation, which is often claimed. While supply and demand dictates that the less there is of something, the more it will be valued, and hence the increased value will limit consumption, reducing the possibility of running out. The incentive to create scarcity, coupled with the inherent short-term reward which results from scarcity-driven base prices, nullifies the idea that this enables strategic preservation. We will likely never run out of oil in the current market system. Rather, the prices will become so high that no one can afford it, while those corporations who own the remaining oil will make a great deal of money off of the scarcity, regardless of the long-term social ramifications. In other words, remaining scarce resources, existing in such high economic value that it limits their consumption, is not to be confused with preservation that is functional and strategic. True strategic preservation can only come from the direct management of the resource in question in regard to the most efficient technical applications of the resource in industry itself, not arbitrary surface price relationships, absent of rational allocation. The Zeitgeist movement. Understandings. Part 1 about. The Zeitgeist movement is not a political movement. It does not recognize nations, governments, races, religions, creeds, or class. Our understandings conclude that these are false, outdated distinctions which are far from positive factors for true collective human growth and potential. Their basis is in power division and stratification, not unity and equality, which is our goal. While it is important to understand that everything in life is a natural progression, we must also acknowledge the reality that the human species has the ability to drastically slow and paralyze progress through social structures which are out of date, dogmatic, and hence out of line with nature itself. The world you see today, full of war, corruption, elitism, pollution, poverty, epidemic disease, Human rights abuses, inequality, and crime is the result of this paralysis. This movement is about awareness, an avocation of a fluid evolutionary progress, both personal, social, technological, and spiritual. It recognizes that the human species is on a natural path for unification, derived from a communal acknowledgement of fundamental and near-empirical understandings of how nature works, and how we as humans fit into / are a part of this universal unfolding we call life. While this path does exist, it is unfortunately hindered and not recognized by the great majority of humans, who continue to perpetuate outdated and hence degenerative modes of conduct and association. It is this intellectual irrelevancy which the Zeitgeist movement hopes to overcome through education and social action. The goal is to revise our world society in accord with present-day knowledge on all levels, not only creating awareness of social and technological possibilities many have been conditioned to think impossible or against human nature, but also to provide a means to overcome those elements in society which perpetuate these outdated systems. An important association upon which many of the ideas of this movement are derived come from an organization called the Venus Project, directed by social engineer and industrial designer Jacques Fresco. He has worked nearly his entire life to create the tools needed to assist a design of the world which could eventually eradicate war, poverty, crime, social stratification, and corruption. His notions are not radical or complex. They do not impose a subjective interpretation in their formation. In this model, society is created as a mirror of nature, with the variables predefined inherently. The movement itself is not a centralized construct. We are not here to lead but to organize and educate. Part 2: The goal. The means is the end. We intend to restore the fundamental necessities and environmental awareness of the species through the advocation of the most current understandings of who and what we truly are, coupled with how science, nature, and technology, rather than religion, politics, and money, hold the keys to our personal growth, not only as individual human beings, but as a civilization, both structurally and spiritually. The central insights of this awareness is the recognition of the emergent and symbiotic elements of natural law, and how aligning with these understandings as the bedrock of our personal and social institutions, life on Earth can and will flourish into a system which will continuously grow in a positive way, where negative social consequences, such as social stratification, war, biases, elitism, and criminal activity will be constantly reduced and, idealistically, eventually become non-existent. Within the spectrum of human behavior itself, this possibility is, of course, very difficult for most humans to consider, for we have been conditioned by society to think that crime, corruption, and dishonesty is the way it is, and that there will always be people who want to abuse, hurt, and take advantage of others. Religion is the largest promoter of this propaganda, for the us and them, or good and evil mentality promotes this false assumption. The reality is that we live in a society that produces scarcity. The consequence of this scarcity is that human beings must behave in self-preserving ways, even if it means they have to cheat and steal in order to get what they want. Our research has concluded that scarcity is one of the most fundamental causes of aberrant human behavior, while also leading to complex forms of neurosis in other ways. A statistical look at drug addiction, crime, and incarceration statistics finds that poverty and unhealthy social conditions comprise the life experience of those who engage in such behavior. Human beings are not good or bad. They are running, forever changing compositions of the life experiences that influences them. The quality of a human being, if there was such a thing, is directly related to the upbringing and thus belief systems they have been conditioned into. This simple reality has been grossly overlooked, and today people primitively think that competition, greed, and corruption are hardwired elements of human behavior, and in turn, we must have prisons, police, and hence a hierarchy of differential control in order for society to deal with these tendencies. This is totally illogical and false. The bottom line is that in order to change things for the better fundamentally, you must begin to address root causes. Our current society's system of punishment is outmoded, inhumane, and unproductive. When a serial killer is caught, most people jump up and down and scream for the death of that person. This is backwards. A truly sane society, which understands what we are and how our value systems are created, would take the individual and learn the reasons behind his or her violent actions. This information would then go to a research department which considers how to stop such conditions from occurring through education. It is time to stop the patchwork. It is time to begin a new social approach which is updated to present-day knowledge. Sadly, society today is still largely based on outmoded, superstitious dispositions and resolutions. It is also important to point out that there are no utopias or endings. All evidence points to perpetual change on all levels. In turn, it is our personal actions every day of our lives that mold and perpetuate the social systems we have in place. Yet, paradoxically, it is also our environmental influences which create our perspectives and hence worldviews. Therefore, true change will come not only from adjusting your personal understandings and decisions, but equally from changing the social structures that influence these understandings and decisions. The elite power systems are little affected in the long run by traditional protest and political movements. We must move beyond these establishment rebellions and work with a tool much more powerful. We will stop supporting the system, while constantly advocating knowledge, peace, unity, and compassion. We cannot fight the system. Hate, anger, and the war mentality are failed means for change, for they perpetuate the same tools the corrupt, established power systems use to maintain control to begin with. The distortion and paralysis. When we understand that all systems are emergent and constantly in a state of evolution, along with the reality that we are all symbiotically connected to nature and each other in the most simple yet profound ways, forcing the realization that our personal integrity is only as high as the integrity of the rest of society, we then see how twisted and backwards our social establishments are, and how their perpetuation is largely the cause of the social instability in society. For example, the monetary system has been long deemed a positive force in society due to its claim to produce incentive and progress. In actuality, the monetary system has become a vehicle for division and totalitarian control. It is the ultimate form of divide and conquer, for at its very core are the assumptions that 1. We must fight each other in order to survive. 2. Humans must have this reward incentive to do anything meaningful. As far as number 1, we must fight each other in order to survive. This characteristic of competition in the system guarantees corruption in society on every level, for the basis is us against them. Many argue that the free market system is good, but it is corrupt in the modern day due to bad policies, favoritism, bailouts, etc. They assume that if a pure free market was allowed to flourish, then it would be okay. This is false, for what you are seeing today is the free market at work, with all its differential advantage and corruption. No laws will ever stop the insider trading, collusion, monopoly, labor abuse, pollution, planned obsolescence, or the like. This is what the competition-based system produces without fail, for it is based on the premise of taking advantage of others for profit. Period. We must begin to transition out of these oppressive ideals and move towards a system which is designed to support human beings, not force them to fight in order to survive. As far as number 2, humans must have this reward incentive to do anything meaningful. This is just a sad and an incredibly negative perspective of the human being in general. To assume that a person must be structurally motivated or hence forced into doing anything is just absurd. Think back to when you were a child and had no idea what money even was. You played, were curious, and did many things. Why? Because you wanted to. However, as time goes on in our system, that natural curiosity and self-motivation is stripped away from people, as they are forced to conform to the specialized, compartmentalized, nearly predefined labor system in order to survive. This, in turn, often creates a natural rebellion within the person due to the forced obligation, and this is how we came up with leisure and work separations. The laziness assumed to exist by the monetary system proponents, who claim it produces incentive, do not recognize this. In a true society, people would follow their natural inclinations and work to contribute to society not because they are paid for it, but because they have a greater awareness which recognizes that contributing to society helps them just as much as everyone else. This is the heightened state of awareness we hope to communicate. Your reward for contributing to society is the well-being of that society, which in turn furthers your well-being. Now, putting things into perspective, it is important to understand that our world is currently run, undeniably, by a small group of dominant men in high positions of those institutions which are most dominant in society, business, and finance. The establishment of government is in tandem with the influence and power of corporations and banks. The lifeblood is money, which is, in fact, an illusion that now has little relevance to society, and serves as a tool for manipulation and division along a kind of social organization that guarantees elitism, crime, war, and social stratification. Simultaneously, individuals are taught that being correct is what creates their value as human beings. This state of being correct is directly related to the prevailing values of society itself. Therefore, those who accept and support the social system's views are considered normal, while those who disagree are considered abnormal or even subversive. Whether it is the dogma of a unique social tradition or the alignment with a worldwide establishment religion, the basis is the same: intellectual materialism. As we realize that knowledge and hence our institutions are always evolving, we see that any belief system which claims to know anything without allowing for dispute is a failed perspective. Religion, with its foundation in faith, is the king of this distortion, as it claims to know something definitively about the most complex and elusive origins of humankind, and this simply is not possible in an emergent universe. That being said, it is then realized that equally as dangerous as the establishment power structures are the people who have been conditioned to completely accept the static understandings put forth by these systems, therefore becoming self-appointed guardians of the status quo. This applies to every system, especially political, financial, and religious systems. Since people's identities become associated with the doctrines of a country, religion, or business ethic, it often becomes very difficult for a person to change, for his or her identity has become combined with the ideologies which have been imposed upon them. Therefore, they perpetuate the doctrine of the institution, simply to maintain their personal integrity as they see it. We must break this cycle, for it paralyzes our growth not only as individuals, but as a society. The truth in transition. Once we understand that the integrity of our personal existences are directly related to the integrity of the earth, life, and all other human beings, we then have our path predefined for us. In turn, once we realize that it is science, technology, and hence human creativity which creates progress in our lives, we are then able to recognize what our true priorities are for social and personal growth and progress. These points denoted, we can then see that religion, politics, and the money/competition-based labor system are outdated modes of social operation, which must now be addressed and outgrown. Our avocation is to achieve a social system which operates without money or politics, while allowing superstition to work itself out as education flourishes. It isn't the right of any person to tell another what to believe, for no human has a full understanding of anything. However, if we pay attention to the natural processes of life, we then see how we can align with nature, and thus our path becomes more clear. For example, many people are worried about population growth on the planet, while very spooky comments by despotic figures like Henry Kissinger claim that some kind of reduction is needed. This is of course very scary. However, the real question remains, is population growth really that bad? The answer is that from a scientific perspective, the Earth can handle many times more people if need be, once high technology is harnessed. 70% of our planet is water, and cities in the sea, one of many projects by Jacques Fresco, are the next step. In turn, education about life operations will inform people as to the ramifications of their reproductive interests, and population growth will naturally slow as people begin to realize how they are related to the planet and its carrying capacity. In fact, the only true government that can possibly exist is the Earth and its resources. From there, all possibilities can be assessed. This is why an intellectual unification of all countries is needed, for the most important information we as a species can have is a full, highly detailed assessment of what we have on this planet. Just as you would examine the land and resources of an acre of land to see what you could do or grow on it, this is what needs to happen with the planet in order to optimize what we are capable of as a species resource-wise. Of course, many who consider the ideas presented above will often ask, how can we do this considering the distorted value systems which are currently in operation? How do we make such a move or transition? This is, of course, the most difficult question. The answer: we have to start somewhere. There are many things that can be done by a single person or community that can begin to shape this vision. The most important step is education. Thank you for your help. Part 3 Synopsis. Fluid social change can only materialize if two circumstances are met. 1. The human value system, which consists of our understandings and beliefs, must be updated and changed through education and thoughtful introspection. 2. The environment surrounding that value system must change to support the new worldview. The interaction between a person's value system and their environment is what influences human behavior. For example, in our culture, ethics really is a matter of degree. For our social system promotes and rewards competition and self-interest. This perspective doesn't just lead to aberrant behavior, it creates it directly. Corruption is the norm in our society, and most people do not see this, for since the society supports this behavior, it is considered right and normal, or as a matter of degree. Given this understanding, there is a fallacy that has emerged where certain groups are deemed corrupt, and everyone else is good. This is the age-old us and them worldview, which has no basis empirically, for it is, again, all a matter of degree. For example, there is a large movement of people who constantly talk about the New World Order, and this notion that there is an elite group of people who have been trying to take over the world for a long time and have manipulated society in various ways to further their goals. This, of course, is true to a certain extent. But the failure of awareness is that this group is not a group at all. It is a tendency. If you took out all the people at the top who are engaged in global hegemonic rule, it would simply be a matter of time before another group stepped in to seek the same ambition. Therefore, it isn't the individual people or groups that are the problem. It is actually the conditions upon which those people have been accustomed and indoctrinated by. Of course, many argue against this view with the escapist notion that it is human nature that causes this competition and need for dominance. This is unsupported by the facts. In reality, we are nearly clean slates when we are born, and it is our environment that shapes who we are and how we behave. Therefore, in order for true change to occur, we must spend less time battling the products of this sick social structure and more time trying to change the root causes. As difficult and daunting as it may be to think this way, it is the only way our world will change for the better. We can continue to stomp on the ants coming out from under the refrigerator, but until we remove the spoiled food behind it, they are just going to keep coming. Part 4. Psychology. Psychology is often defined as the science that deals with mental processes and behavior. In the modern day, there are basically two prevailing schools of thought: geneticists and behaviorists, the old notion of nature versus nurture. The geneticists are inclined to think that human behavior is derived from heredity and instinct. Often on the news, reports detail how some study claims to find the genetic predisposition to being Republican or smoking cigarettes. This supports the worldview that we are hardwired in some way, and that even subtle nuances of behavior, such as an inclination for addiction, is genetic or instinctual in some way. The behaviorists, on the other hand, see the human being as a product of conditioning, as based on the environmental exposure of that person. Therefore, the actions of a person have a source that is derived from experience or a triggered train of thought, brought on by a learned understanding. The mechanism of action/belief therefore is sourced in learning, not heredity or instinct. Which is more relevant? Obviously, both views are relevant in certain ways. Our interest in surviving and reproducing is imprinted/genetic in some way, as it is directly associated with fundamental survival. However, the means by which survival is obtained is entirely based on the social conditioning of that person. If a person grows up in a scarce, poverty-stricken environment with limited access to employment, they will have more of a propensity to engage in illegal activity to survive. More so than, say, a middle-class person who has basic needs met. On the other side of the spectrum, if a person with great wealth has grown up in an elitist family, and is thus conditioned into thinking that his or her wealth/class serves as a status symbol, they might often exploit those who work for them or perform illegal activities to conform to the identity and social arrogance they think is real. The bottom line is that it is environmental conditioning that really affects 99% of our actions, and all diligent behavior studies have proven this time and time again. People become alcoholics not because they have a genetic predisposition, but because of the influence of their parents or friends. If you abuse a child, very often they grow up to abuse other children. When the mass media promotes a certain idea in society, such as terrorism, the public is conditioned into believing this is true and a real threat, regardless of reality. The fact is, we are emergent, vulnerable organisms and always undergoing influence, conditioning, and change to a certain degree. That degree is largely influenced by the social/ideological identifications which many have been conditioned to think are immutable. This particular state of awareness is where paralysis comes in, For there is nothing in nature to support the conclusion that anything we think about today will not be outdated in the future, for one of the few patterns we can stand behind with a certain degree of confidence so far is the reality that all elements of nature are emergent. The identification with a set understandings for the sake of one's integrity is a serious distortion in our world, for it is considered a weakness when a person is proven wrong. This is, of course, absurd, for to be proven wrong is how most learn, and it should not be a feared circumstance. Fritz Perls once said that the human species is the only species that has the ability to interfere with their own growth. This is an important understanding, for our belief systems, which we think we must keep to support our identities, often stand in the way of new, changing understandings and personal growth. The most dominant institutions which perpetuate this paralysis seem to be theistic religion and the monetary system. Theistic religion promotes a fixed worldview, with a faith-based understanding that rejects logic and new information. The monetary system in all countries is based on competition for labor, and thus labor for money. Very simply, the competitive edge can only be sustained through self-perpetuation, and self-perpetuation/self-interest naturally leads to a static institution which prefers not to change, for it threatens the survival of that business, government, or the like. This is unsustainable. Part 5. Sociology. Sociology is often defined as the study of society, human social interaction. This field considers social structures, both cognitive and material. An example of a cognitive social structure is the established institution of religion, and how its operation affects the collective awareness. For instance, pro-life Christians share a disposition that human life is a separate element of nature, and that killing an unborn fetus is wrong. Concurrently, the competition-based monetary system has proponents putting forth ideas such as how competition is the most productive social state that humans can engage in. Material social structures, on the other hand, are very obvious, and they exist in the form of corporations and governments, each having a strong influence on society. Of course, all material social structures bleed over into the cognitive realm, for they always have an ideology behind them. Now, a common sociological issue has to do with human nature and its effect in a collective sense. For instance, most people have been taught that human beings are naturally competitive with each other, along with the assumption that social stratification or hierarchy is also a natural human tendency. This is a fallacy. If you look to, say, a pack of lions, you will see social hierarchy and violent competition for food in most cases. This comparison is what leads people to think it is a natural occurrence in human society as well: war, greed, ego, etc. What is overlooked, however, are the environmental conditions present in each case. The pack of lions exist in a world of scarcity. They do not have the ability to create traps for food, nor is food accessible in an on-demand basis. They have to hunt and fight with each other. This creates competition naturally, for in order to survive, the lions must be aggressive with each other. In turn, hierarchy is developed, for the strongest of these lions wins the most, and in turn exert their dominance in a stratified way. Likewise, in our current human society, the exact same thing is going on. Humans have been living in the same sort of scarcity since the dawn of existence. However, as time has gone on, we have become more and more civilized due to our ability to create. Unlike the lions, humans are able to create tools and set in motion processes that free the human being from a particular chore or problem, reducing scarcity. Given this insight, we then see that on a fundamental level that if scarcity could be eradicated, then human behavior would undergo a dramatic change, moving away from competition, dominance, and stratification. Likewise, outmoded ideologies that do not stand up to the test of time, such as theistic religion, compound this myth that humans/society are built a certain way. For example, the Catholic ideology states that humans are born with sin. This is absurd, outmoded, and based on a primitive understanding of human behavior. There is no difference between a Gandhi baby or a Hitler baby. It is the environment that shapes the person and hence the society, and vice versa. Therefore, true sociological change will come from removing the conditions that cause the aberrant behavior patterns which pollute our societies. Prison, police, and laws are mere patchwork and, in fact, tend to make things worse over time. Ultimately, it is going to take a redesign of our culture to change human behavior for the better. Part 6. Technology. When we consider the relevance of our social structures and ideologies in society, very often we view governments, politicians, and corporations as the guiding organizational and catalytic institutions responsible for the quality of our lives. This is, of course, true, but only to a certain extent. As time has moved forward, human beings have become more and more aware of nature, its processes, and thus have been able to derive inference about how to imitate nature in all its creative glory. The result has been technology, which is what separates us humans from the other species as far as functionality. We have the ability to create in very vast ways. If we don't want to clean sewers, we can devise a machine to do it for us. At the beginning of the industrial age, a great majority of people worked in factories. Today, automation comprises 90% of nearly all factories. This has displaced humans and created a large artificial service industry in order to keep humans in employment for money. This pattern is very revealing. The implication is that machine automation is constantly challenging the role of general human labor. This doesn't mean that humans will have nothing to do as time moves on. Quite the contrary. This implication denotes the freeing of humanity from jobs which humans do not care to engage in, so they will have time to pursue what they choose to. As an aside, it is important to point out that society today assumes a very negative posture towards humanity, retaining the belief that if human beings were not required to do something, they would just sit around, be lazy, and do nothing. This is absurd propaganda. The notion of leisure is a monetary invention, created because of the oppressive, fascist basis of the employment institution itself. Laziness is, in fact, a form of rejection of the system. It is a quality that only exists due to the oppression and required servitude. In a true society, there would be no such thing as the separation of work and leisure, for humans should be allowed to pursue whatever they feel is relevant. To put it a different way, consider the curiosity and interest of a child. He or she doesn't even know what money is. Do they need to be motivated by money to go out and explore/create? No. They have a personal interest and they pursue it without reward. In fact, the greatest contributors to our society, such as Einstein, Newton, or Galileo, pursued what they did without any regard to money. They did it because they wanted to. The act of doing and contributing was their reward. The point here is that money is not a true incentive for anything, and to think as such is to assume that humans are inherently lazy and corrupt. Laziness and corruption are products of the conditioning our social system creates. Now, coming back to technology, we find that our quality of life as far as functionality has been increased greatly by the benefits of the technological tools we create. From a lawnmower to a pacemaker, technology saves lives and decreases the amount of time we need to spend on mundane, difficult, or dangerous activities. In fact, if one steps back far enough, it becomes clear that technological development is the most important institution we have, and the pursuit of socially helpful technology, not weapons, should be the highest priority of the culture. At the same time, technological development is brought about by a particular train of thought or process. This could be called the scientific method. Carl Sagan was once quoted as saying something to the effect of society welcomes the gifts of science, but rejects its methods. This is very true in the modern age, for what the public fails to understand is that science is not just a tool. It is a near universal functionality which can be applied to society in ways many would not think about. It seems obvious that technology improves our lives and serves as the greatest liberator of human life in the material realm. So why aren't its methods applied to society as a whole? Obviously, the scientific method is used constantly for isolated systems, but it has never been truly considered in the broadest ways. This is largely due to age-old superstitions which battle the logic of science in favor of a dogmatic, outdated, and highly romanticized worldview. If we had the option to rebuild a society from scratch, how would we do it to make it the most efficient, sustainable, and humane? This is our perspective. Obviously, we cannot build a society from scratch, but the point is clear. It is time we stop thinking about monetary concerns and limitations, and begin to think about the possibilities we have here on Earth in the broadest sense. It is this interest that has created the concept of a resource-based economy. The Venus Project has been working on this concept for a long time, and its foundation is very simple. We survey, preserve, and maximize our use of planetary resources in conjunction with open information and technological development. In this view, little is left to subjective interpretation, for it is a scientifically derived strategy for social construction at the very core. From there, the scientific parameters work themselves out as far as possibilities. Part 7. Sustainability. When we think of sustainability, often we think of durability, longevity, and environmental respect. In general, a sustainable practice is a practice that takes the health of the future into consideration. However, this idea isn't just reserved for the physical material world. It also applies to thought, belief, human conduct, and society as a whole. An unsustainable practice is one that has an unbalanced negative effect, which through time will adversely affect a person, society, and/or the environment. A classic case is our current use of oil as a medium of energy. This could be considered unsustainable due to the fact that oil is largely unrenewable, and when burned, is damaging to the environment. Any practice that causes an irreversible resource depletion or long-term environmental pollution is an unsustainable practice. Likewise, if a particular company outputs large amounts of waste byproducts during production, polluting the environment, this would be considered an unsustainable practice as well, regardless of what they are producing. Similarly, if materials or knowledge used in the production of a particular kind of product are not of the highest known quality, very often the integrity of that product is compromised inherently, leading to the eventual creation of more waste when that product fails or becomes obsolete. Given our current system of profit, most everything that is produced is done so with a built-in weakness due to the need to compete for market share. In other words, if two companies are each competing to create a certain item, both will need to be strategic in the materials and designs they use, very often compromising quality for the sake of affordability. The result is a product which breaks down much faster than a product which was given the greatest care and highest quality component materials. This doesn't happen in our system for two reasons. One, if a company was to use the best known design and the best known materials, they would likely have a much higher production cost and would likely lose a competitive edge. Two, if products were made to last for extended periods of time, people would not need to repeatedly replace, update, and fix their items as much, and a vast amount of revenue and jobs would be lost by industry at large, slowing the economy. This is, of course, unsustainable by definition, for the inherent inefficiency of the economic system eventually creates unnecessary multiplicities, waste, and pollution. And this leads us to unsustainable ideologies. An unsustainable ideology is one that inherently leads a person or group to unsustainable practices. For instance, the reason a production plant might use poor materials to create unsustainable products, while also outputting a disproportionate amount of waste, is really the result of a larger force known as the monetary or profit system. In a profit system, there is no reward for sustainability, for the system is built upon competition and regeneration. In such a circumstance, sustainability is always second to profit, for the survival of a company is based on profit, and profit is partly based on reducing costs and expanding income. Therefore, the unsustainable practices that exist in all industries are the result of an underlying flaw in the ideological economic structure itself. In theory, most would agree that having an abundance of resources, along with products that are made of the most endurable materials for maximum sustainability and efficiency, is a good thing. However, these notions are not rewarded in our current world monetary system. What is rewarded is scarcity. Scarcity and planned obsolescence are rewarded in the short term, for it creates a turnover of profit, while also making more jobs. Sadly, this short-term reward is at the cost of long-term destruction. The free enterprise system, along with all other subgroups, such as communism, socialism, and fascism, is an unsustainable ideology, for it has built into it a propensity for environmental and social abuse. To put it more clearly, a world that is in competition with itself for labor, resources, and survival is an unsustainable system inherently, for it lacks an external conscience. So then, what is unsustainable ideology? While this question will always bring new answers as human evolution continues, in the present day we have a concept called the scientific method. Very simply, the scientific method is a process of investigation which, though the most modern methods of learning, measurement, testing, and experimentation, works to demonstrate the validity of a particular understanding or possible resolution to a particular problem. An example would be a problem with a car. If your car doesn't start, you would begin a train of thought based on logic to find the source of the problem. Logic would guide your focus, likely beginning with how much gas is in the car, moving towards the ignition mechanism, etc. This is the scientific method applied to problem solving. A non-scientific method for such a problem would fall under the category of irrational. For instance, if your car doesn't start, it would be irrational to start looking at the tires, for the tires would likely have nothing to do with the mechanisms associated with the problem. Sadly, our approach to social operation is largely without logic or methodology, but rather it is submerged in tradition, superstition, and outmoded methods of conduct. A scientific approach to society, using logic and reason to assess and react to social issues, would have a natural gravitation towards sustainability, for nothing can be isolated or detached in such an approach. In other words, we need to stop looking at the world through the blinders of the systems and ideologies that have been created in the past, and start looking at the world in the most broad, unbiased way we can. The only medium which supports this approach is science, and the gifts of science have proved its validity without question. Therefore, it is time we utilize the methods of science in our approach to society itself. A quick glance at the modes of operation used in the world today reflect a gross negligence of reason, logic, and scientific application. Our economic structures are based on mediums of exchange and values, which have little relationship to true resources and reality. Religion continues to preach worldviews which have long been overridden by progressive scientific thought. Our labor system is set up so that people must be employed in order to gain money to survive, while the actual contribution that these occupations have to society are highly suspect, showing that jobs often exist simply to keep people doing something in order to live and support the economic structure. This is a waste of human life. There are many facets to the understanding that our current social institutions are unsustainable. To summarize the issue, our life on Earth must have a foundational premise by which our operations relate. This premise must be as empirical as possible, and not based on opinion or projection. From a scientific perspective, we see that resources and human ingenuity are the most valuable issues at hand. Human intelligence and awareness, coupled with the thoughtful management and utilization of Earth resources, are really the only two core issues. Everything else is built upon this. Therefore, we need to begin an approach which maximizes education, technology, and resource management. Until this is done, sustainability will be in jeopardy. This is the goal of the Venus Project and the Zeitgeist movement. Part 8. Spirituality. Spirituality has a different meaning to each of us, it seems. A standard definition would be a sense of meaning and purpose, a sense of self and of a relationship with that which is greater than self. Currently, religion and mysticism seem to have the monopoly on spirituality. Theistic religion often regards a relationship with God, or divine creator, as a spiritual relationship, while mystics will often find a relationship to a supernatural force or power. The bottom line is that, almost universally, spirituality has to do with a relationship on one level or another. In most perspectives, it is associated with a person's place or meaning in life, whatever that may be. As subjective as these things can be, we begin to recognize changes in these notions, for social progress tends to carve a path for understandings that stand the test of time. In the modern age, we have the ability to look far in our past and examine what our ancestors used to consider real, and then compare those ideas to what we understand today. Many spiritual practices, which have existed in the past, no longer exist due to the understandings that have come about in regard to natural phenomenon. As a base example, early religions often sacrificed animals for certain purposes. This rarely happens today, as the relevance of such an act has proven pointless in its desired effect. Likewise, rarely do people perform rain dances in order to influence the weather. Today we understand how weather patterns are created, and ritual practices have no provable effect. Similarly, the idea of praying to a god for a particular request has also statistically proven to have little effect on an outcome, not to mention the evidence to support a personified creator doesn't exist in any scientific way. Rather, it is often derived from ancient historical literary speculation and tradition. Establishment religion, in many ways, seems to be rooted in a perceptual misunderstanding about life's processes. For instance, it presents a worldview which often puts the human on a different level than other elements of nature. This spiritual ego has led to dramatic conflicts for generations, not only between human beings, but inadvertently between us and the environment itself. However, as time has moved forward, science has shown how human beings are subject to the exact same forces of nature as everything else. We have learned that we all share the same atomic substructure as trees, birds, and all other forms of life. We have learned that we cannot live without nature's elements. We need clean air to breathe, food to eat, energy from the sun, etc. When we understand this symbiotic relationship of life, we begin to see that as far as relationships are concerned, our relationship to the planet is the most profound and important. The medium by which this is expressed is science, for the scientific method has allowed us insight into these natural processes, so we can better understand how we fit into this life system as a whole. This could be called a spiritual awakening. This realization, which has been proven by science, is that humans are no different from any other form of nature, while our integrity is only as good as the integrity of our environment, to which we are a part. This understanding presents an entirely different spiritual worldview, for it forces the idea of interdependence and connection at its core. The interconnection of the whole of life is undeniable in the most basic sense, and it is this perpetual relationship of total interconnectivity that is not fully realized by society overall. Thus, our modes of conduct and perception are largely out of line with nature itself, and hence destructive. Nature itself is our teacher, and our social institutions and philosophies should be derived from this foundational and invariably spiritual understanding. The faster this spiritual awakening spreads, the more sane, peaceful, and productive society will become. The Venus Project is a 501(c)(3) nonprofit organization dedicated to designing human habitats that simultaneously enhance human well-being, while remaining fit to the carrying capacity of Earth and local ecosystems, accommodating multiple resource scenarios and resilient to any catastrophic event. In service of this purpose, the Venus Project explores new materials, new sources of energy, new construction methods, and a new resource management paradigm for a humane and sustainable culture. The pioneering origins of the Venus Project extend far into history. As one of the earliest responses to the metacrisis, the history of work spans decades and hitherto represents a 90-year continuity. The Venus Project presents the culmination of decades of inquiry into the connection between global resource mismanagement and problems such as war, poverty, crime, climate change, and ecological destruction. In response to these challenges, the Venus Project harnesses a holistic design methodology, including interdisciplinarity and a systems approach, in combination with evolutionary mechanisms to renew human habitats and restore the natural environment. With a philosophy emphasizing connection and integration and prioritizing balance, we present a set of values and objectives that outline the conditions of success for a sustainable civilization. Above all, we assert that no civilization will prevail in the long term without acknowledging that the enhancement of human well-being depends first on its alignment with nature. Despite energy and material constraints, with the wise application of the best of what we collectively already know, through science and technology, both in service of an unwavering devotion to ecology, we believe our hypotheses, if tested, offer the brightest prospect for an unparalleled positive impact. The Venus Project. The Future and Beyond. Jacques Fresco's Essays. Part 1. Beyond Utopia. With the advent of future developments in science and technology, we will assign more and more decision-making to machines. At present, this is evident in military systems in which electronic sensors maintain the ideal flight characteristics in advanced aircraft. The capacities of computers today exceed 500 trillion bits of information per second. The complexity of today's civilization is far too complex for human systems to manage without the assistance of electronic computers. Computers of today are relatively primitive compared to those that will evolve in the future. Eventually, the management of social systems will require electronic sensors interconnected with all phases of the social sequences, thus eliminating the need for politics. Today, modern industrial plants have built-in automatic inventory systems, which order materials such as bearings and other mechanical replacements well in advance. We believe it is now possible to achieve a society where people would be able to live longer, healthier, and more meaningful productive lives. In such a society, The measure of success would be based upon the fulfillment of one's individual pursuits rather than the acquisition of wealth, property, and power. Although many of the concepts presented here may appear as unattainable goals, all of the ideas are based upon known scientific principles. It is not my purpose to write an article that would be acceptable to people. This is not the concern of science. The social direction being proposed here has no parallel in history with any other previous political ideology or economic strategy. Establishing the parameters of this new civilization will require transcending many of the traditions, values, and methods of the past. The future will evolve its own new paradigms, appropriate to each successive phase of human and technological development. Throughout the history of civilization, few national leaders or politicians have ever proposed a comprehensive plan to improve the lives of all people under their jurisdiction. Although such individuals as Plato, Edward Bellamy, H.G. Wells, Karl Marx, and Howard Scott all made some attempts to present a new civilization, the established social order considered them impractical dreamers with utopian designs that ran contrary to the innate elements of human nature. Arrayed against these social pioneers was a formidable status quo composed of vested interests that were comfortable with the way things were, and a populace at large that, out of years of indoctrination and conditioning, wanted no radical changes. These were the millions of unappointed guardians of the status quo. The outlook and philosophy of the leaders were consistent with their positions of differential advantage. In 1898, Edward Bellamy wrote the book Looking Backward. He conceived of an ideal egalitarian social system with many advanced ideas for its time. This bestseller generated a great deal of interest, and many people inquired as to how this type of cooperative utopian society could be brought about. But Bellamy replied that he was just a writer, and did not know how to create such a society. The proposals he presented, and those of Plato's Republic, the writings of Karl Marx, H.G. Wells in his book The Shape of Things to Come, and many others all represent attempts to find workable solutions to the many problems that earlier civilizations were unable to resolve. There is little doubt that at the time of Bellamy's books the social conditions were abominable, which made the utopian ideal extremely appealing. What appears to be lacking in most of these concepts, however, has been an overall plan and the necessary methods for a transitional system to enable the idea to become a reality. Most of the early visions of a better world did not allow for changes in either technology or human values, tending to arrest innovative efforts. Additionally, all have lacked a comprehensive set of blueprints, models, and a methodology for implementation. Finally, they lacked competent individuals to bring about such a transition. The answers do not lie in debate or philosophical discussion of values, but rather in methodology. Thus, what is needed is an operational definition of a better world, which is as follows: to constantly maximize existing and future technologies with the sole purpose of enhancing all human life and protecting the environment. Today we have developed the necessary technology to surpass the fondest hopes and dreams of any social innovators of the past. The fact that previous attempts at social change have failed is no justification for us to stop trying. The real danger lies in complacence. The only limitations to the future of humankind are those that we impose upon ourselves. It is now possible to relieve humanity of many of its unresolved problems through the humane application of technology. Many years ago an attempt was made in the U.S. to understand a social and economic system different from our own. A film called The March of Time had this to say about Soviet communism: "We believe that the American free enterprise system will function better than the collective system. However, we wish you the best of luck on your new and unusual social experiment." The failure of communism to provide for human needs and to enrich the lives of its citizens is not unlike our own failures. Both failure and success are inherent in the ongoing experiment that is social evolution. In all established social systems, it is necessary to devise different approaches to improve the workings of the system. Science is replete with examples of experiments that have failed, as well as those that have been successful. In the development of the airplane, for example, there were thousands of failures before the first workable model was produced. In the field of medicine, Dr. Ehrlich attempted over 600 different approaches to controlling syphilis before one was finally proven successful. All of the technology we use today, such as computers, cellular phones, the internet, aircraft, and automobiles, are in a constant state of improvement and modification. Yet our social system and values remain largely static. An inscription on one of our government buildings reads as follows: "Where there is no vision, the people perish." Attaining visions requires change. The major reason for resisting change is that it tends to threaten the established interests. Actually, the fear of social change is somewhat unfounded when we consider that the entire history of civilization has been, in a sense, an experiment. Even the American free enterprise system, during its earliest stages, faced a multitude of problems much more severe than they are today. These included long work hours, exploitation of child labor, inadequate ventilation in industrial plants, lack of rights for women and minorities, hazardous conditions in mines, and racial prejudice. Despite its many problems, it was the greatest social experiment in history in terms of diversity of lifestyles and individual freedoms, innovations in architecture and technology, and overall progress in general. It is imperative that we continue the process of social experimentation in order to transcend our present limitations and enhance the lives of everyone. The future does not depend on our present-day beliefs or social customs, but will continue to evolve a set of values unique to its own time. There are no utopias. The very notion of utopia is static. However, the survival of any social system ultimately depends upon its ability to allow for appropriate change to improve society as a whole. The paths that we choose will ultimately determine whether or not there is intelligent life on Earth. Part 2. New frontiers of social change. It has often been observed that common crises create common bonds. While people seek advantage during the times of prosperity, shared suffering tends to draw people closer together. We have seen this behavior repeated time and time again throughout the centuries, during times of flood, famine, fire, or other natural disasters. Once the threat is resolved, however, scarcity patterns once again begin to steer people back to their behaviors of seeking individual advantage. Sensationalist motion pictures such as Independence Day depict a world united for the purpose of repelling an invasion by a hostile alien culture. Indeed, it seems that the only force that would mobilize the world in a unified direction would be one that poses a common threat, such as a colossal meteor hurling towards the Earth, or some other major catastrophic event. If such an event were to occur, all border disputes would become irrelevant in the face of impending disaster. While many would call upon divine intervention for salvation, all nations would surely combine their efforts and call upon science and technology to deal with this common threat. Bankers, lawyers, businessmen, and politicians would all be bypassed. Every resource would be harnessed and mobilized, without any concern for monetary cost or profit. Under this kind of threatening condition, most people realize where the key to their survival lies. For example, during the Second World War, it was the collective mobilization of both human and material resources that led to a successful resolution for the US and its allies. As the amount of scientific information grows, nations and people are coming to realize that even in today's divided world there are, in fact, many common threats that transcend national boundaries. These include overpopulation, energy shortages, pollution, water shortages, economic catastrophe, the spread of uncontrollable disease, and so forth. However, faced even with threats of this magnitude, which are common to all nations, the direction of human action will not be altered so long as powerful nations are able to maintain control of the limited resources available. Although many people, publications, and multimedia presentations portray various aspects of the future and paint spectacular pictures of the developments to come in such areas as transportation, housing, and medicine, they ignore the fact that in a monetary-based economy the full benefits of these developments continue to be available to a relative few. What is not touched upon is how these new technologies of the future can be used to organize societies and economies efficiently and equitably, without the necessity of uniformity, so that everyone would benefit from them. The few think tanks devoted to brainstorming newer approaches to bring social organization up to speed with today's technological capabilities do not deal with social change as a global systems plan. Neither are there any overall social plans in government or industry to totally eliminate the negative effects of the displacement of people by machines, nor does there seem to be any genuine concern to do so. Many people believe that in the event of any social breakdown, the government will bring about the necessary changes for their survival. This is highly improbable. In the event of such a breakdown, the existing government would most likely declare a state of emergency in an attempt to prevent total chaos. It would then institute measures that may address immediate problems, at the same time attempting to preserve existing institutions and power structures, even though these may be a chief contributing factor to the problems. Many people throughout history have taken politicians to task for actions that have not been entirely in society's best interest. The reasons for this become clearer when one realizes that even in modern democracies, these leaders do not benefit the lives of the average person. Rather, they maintain the preferential positions of much of the established order. There are growing indications of awareness on the part of people in many areas of the world that events have gone beyond the control of their political leaders. Everywhere we see political figures and parties come and go, political strategies adopted and discarded for their inability to satisfy the demands of one faction or another. The reason that we do not suggest writing your congressman, or any number of governmental agencies, is that they lack the necessary knowledge to deal with our problems. Their focus is to preserve existing systems, not to change them. It appears that there are few within present-day societies who want to phase themselves out. In modern industrial societies, the cause of inaction lies within the cumbersome political process itself, an anachronism in an era when most decisions can be made on any important issue in a split second by the objective entry of relevant data into computers. The prime conditions that would really affect social change will come about when conditions have deteriorated to such an extent that governments, politicians, and social institutions no longer have the support and confidence of the people. What once worked is acknowledged to be no longer relevant. If the public were better informed, only then would it be possible to introduce a new and improved social arrangement. Unfortunately, today the majority of people respond to simplistic answers which tend to repeat the cycle of events. When faced with intolerable social conditions, many of the older patterns will emerge again as people attempt to find someone or something to blame for the conditions, e.g. minorities, immigrants, negligence in adhering to religious principles or family values, and the influences of some inexplicable supernatural forces. True social change is not brought about by men and women of reason and goodwill on a personal level. The notion that one can sit and talk to individuals and alter their values is highly improbable. If the person one is talking to does not have the fundamental knowledge of the operation of scientific principles and the processes of natural laws, it is difficult for them to understand how the pieces fit together on a holistic level. The solutions to our problems will not come about through the application of reason or logic. Unfortunately, at present we do not live in a reasonable or logical world. There appears to be no historical record of any established society's leader who deliberately and comprehensively redesigned a culture to fit the changing times. While there is no question that political leaders, to a limited extent, modify some modes of behavior, the real factors responsible for social change are brought about by biosocial pressures, which are inherent in all social systems. Change is brought about by natural or economic occurrences that adversely affect the immediate circumstances of large numbers of people. Some biosocial pressures responsible for social change are limited resources, war, overpopulation, epidemics, natural disasters, economic recession, downsizing on a mass scale, technological displacement of people by machines, and the failure of elected officials to overcome such problems. The introduction of the medium of money to the exchange process brought about a significant change in society, as did the introduction of mechanized agriculture and the Industrial Revolution. Unfortunately, the world's outmoded social, political, and international order is no longer appropriate to these times. These obsolete social institutions are unable to grasp the significance of innovative technology to achieve the greatest good for all people, and to overcome the inequities forced upon so many. Competition and scarcity have caused an atmosphere of jealousy and mistrust to develop between individuals and nations. The concepts of proprietary rights, intellectual property, copyrights, and patents manifested in corporate entities and in the sovereignty of nations preclude the free exchange of information that is necessary to meet global challenges. The European Union represents an attempt to bridge the present with the future, but it falls far short in that it relies on the crutch of the monetary system. We cannot regress to traditional values which no longer apply. Any attempt to retreat to the methods of the past would condemn untold millions to a life of needless misery, toil, and suffering. However, it is not enough to point out the limiting factors that may threaten the survivability of all nations. The challenge that all cultures will encounter in this technological age some more than others, is that of providing a smoother transition, which would introduce a more appropriate way of thinking about ourselves, the environment, and the management of human affairs. The ultimate survival of the human species depends upon planning on a global scale, and to cooperatively seek out new alternatives with a relative orientation for improved social arrangements. If humankind is to achieve mutual prosperity, universal access to resources is essential, along with the introduction of new paradigms towards human and environmental concern. There must be a methodology for making this a reality. If these ends are to be achieved, the monetary system must eventually be surpassed by a world resource-based economy. In order to effectively and economically utilize resources, the necessary cyberneted and computerized technology could eventually be applied to ensure a higher standard of living for everyone. With the intelligent and humane application of science and technology, the nations of the world could guide and shape the future for the preservation of the environment and humankind. What is needed to attain a global society is a practical and internationally acceptable comprehensive blueprint. Also needed is an international planning council capable of translating the blueprint and the advantages that would be gained through world unification. This proposal could be presented in the vernacular, in a way that non-technical people can easily understand. In actuality, no one should make decisions as to how this blueprint will be designed. It must be based on the carrying capacity of our planet, its resources, human needs, and the like. In order to sustain our civilization, we must coordinate advanced technology and available resources in a total, humane, global systems approach. There is no doubt that many of the professions that are familiar to us today will eventually be phased out. With the rate of change now taking place, a vast array of obsolete occupations will disappear more rapidly and more extensively than at any other time in history. In a society that applies a systems approach, these professions will be replaced by interdisciplinary teams. The systems analysts, computer programmers, operation researchers, and those who link the world together in vast communications networks that are assisted by high-speed digital computers. They will eventually lead us to large-scale computer-based methods of social operation. Social operations are far too complex today for any elected politicians to handle. It appears that most politicians do not give serious attention to this and other problems. Only in times of war or national emergencies do we call upon and assemble interdisciplinary teams to help find workable solutions to varying social problems. If we apply the same efforts of scientific mobilization as we do during a war, large-scale beneficial effects can be achieved in a relatively short time. This could readily be accomplished by utilizing many of our universities, training facilities, and staff to best determine possible alternative methods to solving these problems. This could eventually help us to define the possible transitional parameters for the future of a sustainable global civilization. The process of social change must allow for changing conditions that would continuously update the design parameters and allow for the infusion of new technologies into emerging cultures. Design teams utilizing socially integrated computers could automatically be informed of new developments. As this process is continuously updated, it would generate a more appropriate code of conduct. By appropriate conduct, we mean the necessary procedures to accomplish a given task. All the limitations imposed upon us by our present-day monetary system could be surpassed by adopting a global consensus for a worldwide resource-based economy, in which all the planetary resources are viewed and treated as the common heritage of all the Earth's inhabitants. In this manner, the Earth and our technological procedures could provide us with a limitless supply of material goods and services without the creation of debt or taxation whatsoever. Part 3. The obsolete monetary system. Although skillful advertisers lead us to believe otherwise, in today's monetary-based economies, whenever new technology is introduced, the human consequences are of little concern to those introducing the technology, except, of course, as customers. In a monetary-based system, the major concerns of industry are profit, maintaining a competitive edge, and watching the bottom line, rather than the well-being of humanity. The social problems that arise from mass unemployment of people, who are rendered obsolete by the infusion of automation, are considered irrelevant, if they are considered at all. Any need that may be met is secondary to acquiring a profit for the business. If the profit is insufficient, the service will be withdrawn. What industry seeks to do is improve the competitive edge to increase the profit margin for their shareholders. It does not serve the interest of a monetary-based society to engage in the production of goods and services to enhance the lives of people as a goal. With rising public concern regarding the greenhouse effect, acid rain, polluted air and water, etc., some companies are also beginning to realize that for sustained market presence, it is in their best interest to heed social and environmental concerns. While such trends are commendable, they are insufficient as a method of solving the overall problems of waste, environmental degradation, and unnecessary human suffering. The monetary system has been a useful but interim tool. It came into being as a means of placing a value on scarce objects and labor. The monetary system, of course, replaced the barter system, which involved direct trading of objects and labor. However, just as there was no universal bartering standard in the past, there is no global monetary system today. Individuals and groups, now as in the past, however, still need to exchange objects and labor for today's goods and services. The unequal distribution of skills, resources, and materials throughout the world necessitates global trade. Until the last few decades, the monetary system functioned to a degree. The global population of 3 billion was not over-consuming world resources and energy, global warming was not evident, and air and water pollution were only recognized by a relative few. The start of the 21st century, however, finds global population at an exponentially rising 6 billion. With resources and energy supplies dwindling, global warming a reality, and pollution evident worldwide. Planet Earth is in crises, and the majority of world population cannot meet their basic needs because people do not have the means to purchase increasingly expensive resources. Money is now the determinant of people's standard of living, rather than the availability of resources. In a monetary system, purchasing power is not related to our capacity to produce goods and services. For example, in a recession there are CDs in store windows and automobiles in car lots, but many people do not have the purchasing power to buy them. The earth is still the same place. It is just the rules of the game that are obsolete and create strife, deprivation, and unnecessary human suffering. In today's culture of profit, we do not produce goods based on human need. We do not build houses based on population needs. We do not grow food to feed people. Industry's major motivation is profit. The monetary system is now an impediment to survival, rather than a means of facilitating individual existence and growth. This imaginary tool has outlived its usefulness. The limitations on Earth's population now caused by the monetary construct can be phased out. It is not money that people need but the access to goods and services. Since humanity requires resources to exist, the replacement system should provide those resources directly to people without the impediment of financial and political interest for their private gain at the expense of the lives and livelihood of the populace. The replacement system is therefore logically a resource-based economy. This global resource-based economy would be gradually phased in while the monetary system is phased out. All of the world's economic systems, socialism, communism, fascism, and even the vaunted free enterprise capitalist system, perpetuate social stratification, elitism, nationalism, and racism, primarily based on economic disparity. As long as a social system uses money or barter, people and nations will seek to maintain positions of differential advantage. If they cannot do so by means of commerce, they will resort to military intervention. War represents the supreme failure of nations to resolve their differences. From a strictly pragmatic standpoint, it is the most inefficient waste of lives and resources ever conceived by any creature on the planet. This crude and violent way of attempting to resolve international differences has taken on even more ominous overtones with the advent of elaborate computerized thermonuclear delivery systems, deadly diseases and gases, and the threat of sabotage of a nation's computer networks. Despite the desire of nations to achieve peace, they usually lack the knowledge of how to arrive at peaceful solutions. War is not the only form of violence in the developed and underdeveloped countries that is superimposed upon the populace by inadequate social arrangements. There is also hunger, poverty, and scarcity. As long as there is the use of money, the creation of debt, and economic insecurity, these conditions will perpetuate crime, lawlessness, and resentment. Paper proclamations and treaties do not alter conditions of scarcity and insecurity. And nationalism only tends to help propagate the separation of nations and the world's people. Even the signing of a peace treaty cannot avoid another war if the underlying causes are not addressed. The unworkable aspects of international law tend to freeze things as they are. All of the nations that have conquered land all over the world by force and violence would still retain their positions of territorial and resource advantage. Whether we realize it or not, such agreements only serve as temporary suspensions to conflict. Attempting to find solutions to the monumental problems within our present society will only serve as temporary patchwork, prolonging an obsolete system. In this world of constant change, it is no longer a question of whether we choose to make the necessary changes. It is now mandatory that we take on this challenge and adopt these new requirements or face the inevitable decay of our present social and economic institution. This is the dilemma we must face head-on, and the solutions we arrive at must fit the circumstances of the real world. There appears to be no other way than to update our outlook and create a newer direction by relegating the old values to past civilizations. Unfortunately, this may not be accomplished prior to the point of no return in the global economy. Part 4. Resource-based economy. Presented here is a straightforward approach to the redesign of a culture, in which the age-old inadequacies of war, poverty, hunger, debt, and unnecessary human suffering are viewed not only as avoidable, but totally unacceptable. This new social design works towards eliminating the underlying causes that are responsible for many of our problems. But, as stated previously, they cannot be eliminated within the framework of the present monetary and political establishment. Human behavior is subject to the same laws that govern all other physical phenomena. Our customs, behaviors, and values are byproducts of our culture. No one is born with greed, prejudice, bigotry, and hatred. They are learned. If the environment is unaltered, similar problems will reoccur. These aspirations cannot be accomplished in a monetary-based society of waste and human exploitation. With its planned obsolescence, neglect of the environment, outrageous military expenditures, and the outworn methods of attempting to solve problems through the enactment of laws, these methods are bound to fail. Furthermore, the belief that advanced technologies would lead to an improvement in the quality of life for most people is not the case in a monetary system. More and more companies are adopting the tremendous benefits of automation, resulting in increased production with fewer employees. Corporations' short-term concern with profit will ultimately result in the demise of the world monetary-based economies. If the monetary system continues to operate, we will be faced with the condition of more technological unemployment, today referred to as downsizing. From 1990 to 1995, companies dismissed a staggering 17.1 million employees, many of these due to automation. Automation will continue to replace people well into the foreseeable future, resulting in the lack of purchasing power for these displaced workers. Despite expanding global markets, the human cost in terms of displaced workers and a disenfranchised populace will inevitably bring about massive and unmanageable social problems. During the 1930s, at the height of the Great Depression, the Roosevelt administration enacted new social legislation designed to minimize revolutionary tendencies and to address the problems of unemployment. Jobs were provided through the Works Progress Administration, Civilian Conservation Corps, National Recovery Act, transient camps, and federal arts projects. Ultimately, however, World War II pulled the U.S. out of that worldwide depression. If we permit current conditions to take their natural course, we will soon be faced with another international recession of potentially greater magnitude. At the time of this depression, the U.S. had only 600 first-class fighting aircraft. At the beginning of World War II, we rapidly increased production to 90,000 planes per year. Did we have enough money to pay for the required implements of war? The answer is no. Neither did we have enough gold. But we did have more than enough resources. It was the available resources and personnel that enabled the U.S. to achieve the production and efficiency required to win the war. Unfortunately, such an all-out effort is only considered in times of war or disaster. We live in a culture that seems to work collectively only in response to a crisis. Only in times of war do we call upon and assemble interdisciplinary teams to meet a threat from human aggression. Only in times of national emergency do we do the same to resolve a natural or man-made threat. Rarely, if ever, Do we employ a concerted effort to help find workable solutions to social problems? If we apply the same efforts of scientific mobilization towards social betterment as we do during a war or disaster, large-scale results could be achieved in a relatively short time. The Earth is still abundant with resources. Today, our practice of rationing resources through monetary methods is irrelevant and counterproductive to the well-being of people. Today's society has access to highly advanced technologies and can easily provide more than enough for a very high standard of living for all the Earth's people. This is possible through the implementation of a resource-based economy. Simply stated, a resource-based economy utilizes existing resources rather than money and provides an equitable method of distribution in the most humane and efficient manner for the entire population. It is a system in which all natural, man-made, machine-made, and synthetic resources would be available without the use of money, credits, barter, or any other form of symbolic exchange. A resource-based economy would utilize existing resources from the land and sea, and the means of production, such as physical equipment and industrial plants, to enhance the lives of the total population. In an economy based on resources rather than money, we could easily produce all of the necessities of life and provide a high standard of living for all. To further clarify the concept of a resource-based economy, consider this example. A group of people is stranded on an island with enormous purchasing power, including gold, silver, and diamonds. All this wealth would be irrelevant to their survival if the island had few resources such as food, clean air, and water. Only when population exceeds the productive capacity of the land do problems such as greed, crime, and violence emerge. On the other hand, if people were stranded on an island that was abundant with natural resources producing more than the necessities for survival, then a monetary system would be irrelevant. It is only when resources are scarce that money can be used to control their distribution. One could not, for example, sell the air we breathe, the sand on the beach, or the salt water in the ocean to someone else on the island who has equal access to all these things. In a resource-based economy, all of the world's resources would be held as the common heritage of all of the Earth's people, thus eventually outgrowing the need for the artificial boundaries that separate people. This is the unifying imperative. We must emphasize here that this approach to global governance has nothing whatever in common with the present aims of a corporate elite to form a world government with themselves and large corporations in control, and the vast majority of the world's population subservient to them. Globalization in a resource-based economy empowers each and every person on the planet to be the very best they can be, not to live in abject subjugation to a corporate governing body. All social systems, regardless of political philosophy, religious beliefs, or social customs, ultimately depend upon natural resources, e.g. clean air and water, arable land, and the necessary technology and personnel to maintain a high standard of living. This can be accomplished through the intelligent and humane application of science and technology. The real wealth of any nation lies in its developed and potential resources, and the people who are working toward the elimination of scarcity and the development of a more humane way of life. A resource-based economy would use technology to overcome scarce resources by utilizing renewable sources of energy, computerizing and automating manufacturing, inventory and distribution, designing safe, energy-efficient cities, providing universal health care and relevant education, and most of all, by generating a new incentive system based on human and environmental concern. Unfortunately, today's science and technology have been diverted from these ends for reasons of self-interest and monetary gain through the conscious withdrawal of efficiency, or through planned obsolescence. For example, it is an ironic state of affairs when the U.S. Department of Agriculture, whose function is to conduct research into ways of achieving higher crop yields per acre, pays farmers not to produce at full capacity while many people go hungry. Another example is the choice of some companies to illegally dump solid waste into oceans and rivers to save money, when more ecologically sound disposal methods are available. A third example is the failure of some industries to install electrostatic precipitators in their factories' smokestacks to prevent particulate matter from being released into the atmosphere, even though the technology has been available for over 75 years. The monetary system does not always apply known methods that would best serve people and the environment. In a resource-based economy, the human aspect would be of prime concern, and technology would be subordinate to this. This would result in a considerable increase in leisure time. In an economy in which production is accomplished primarily by machines, and products and services are available to all, the concepts of work and earning a living would become irrelevant. But if the human consequences of automation are unresolved as they are today, then it renders all the advances of science and technology of much less significance. The utilization of today's high-speed and large-capacity computer systems, otherwise known as the information superhighway or Internet, could assist us in defining the variables and parameters required for the operation of a resource-based economy that conforms to environmental needs. Overexploitation of resources would be unnecessary and surpassed. Many people believe that there is too much technology in the world today, and that technology is the major cause of our environmental pollution. This is not the case. Rather, it is the abuse and misuse of technology that should be our major concern. In very simple terms, a hammer can be used to construct a building, or to kill another person. It is not the hammer that is the issue, but how it is used. Cybernation, or the application of computers and automation to the social system, could be regarded as an emancipation proclamation for humankind if used humanely and intelligently. Its thorough application could eventually enable people to have the highest conceivable standard of living with practically no labor. It could free people for the first time in human history from a highly structured and outwardly imposed routine of repetitive and mundane activity. It could enable one to return to the Greek concept of leisure, where slaves did most of the work and men had time to cultivate their minds. The essential difference is that in the future, each of us will command more than 1 million slaves, but they will be mechanical and electrical slaves, not fellow human beings. This will end forever the degrading exploitation of any human being by another so that he or she lives an abundant, productive, and less stressful life. Perhaps the greatest aid in enhancing the survival of the human race is the introduction of cybernation, the electronic computer, and artificial intelligence, which may very well save the human race from its own inadequacies. A resource-based economy calls for the redesign of our cities, transportation systems, and industrial plants so that they are energy efficient, clean, and conveniently provide the needs of all people both materially and spiritually. These new cybernated cities would have their electrical sensors' autonomic nervous system extended into all areas of the social complex. Their function would be to coordinate a balance between production and distribution, and to operate a balance load economy. Decisions would be arrived at on the basis of feedback from the environment. Despite today's mania for national security and subsequent intrusions into everyone's personal affairs, in a worldwide resource-based economy where no one need take from another, it will be considered socially offensive and counterproductive for machines to monitor the activities of individuals. In fact, such intrusion would serve no useful purpose. To further understand the operation of cybernation in the city system, for example, in the agricultural belt, the electronic probes embedded in the soil would automatically keep a constant inventory of the water table, soil conditions, nutrients, etc., and act appropriately without the need for human intervention. This method of industrial electronic feedback could be applied to the entire management of a global economy. All raw materials used to manufacture products can be transported directly to the manufacturing facilities by automated transportation sequences, such as ships, monorails, trains, pipelines, and pneumatic tubes, and the like. All transportation systems are fully utilized in both directions. There would be no empty trucks, trains, or transport units on return trips. There would be no freight trains stored in yards, awaiting a business cycle for their use. An automated inventory system would be connected to both the distribution centers and the manufacturing facilities, thus coordinating production to meet demand and providing a constant evaluation of preferences and consumption statistics. In this way, a balanced load economy can be assured and shortages, overruns, and waste could be eliminated. The method for the distribution of goods and services in a resource-based economy, without the use of money or tokens, could be accomplished through the establishment of distribution centers. These distribution centers would be similar to a public library or an exposition, where the advantages of new products can be explained and demonstrated. For example, if one were to visit Yellowstone National Park, one could check out a still or video camera on site, use the camera, and if they do not want to keep it, return it to another readily accessible distribution center or drop-off point, thus eliminating the individual's need to store and maintain the equipment. In addition to computerized centers, which would be located throughout the various communities, there would be 3D, flat-screen televised imaging capabilities right in the convenience of one's own home. If an item is desired, an order would be placed, and the item could be automatically delivered directly to a person's place of residence. With the infusion of a resource-based world economy and an all-out effort to develop new, clean, renewable sources of energy, such as geothermal, controlled fusion, solar heat concentrators, photovoltaics, wind, wave, tidal power, and fuel from the oceans, we will eventually be able to have energy in unlimited quantity that could serve civilization for thousands of years. To better understand the meaning of a resource-based economy, consider this. If all the money in the world were to suddenly disappear, as long as topsoil, factories, and other resources were left intact, we could build anything we chose to build and fulfill any human need. It is not money that people need, but rather it is freedom of access to most of their necessities without ever having to appeal to a government bureaucracy or any other agency. In a resource-based economy, money would become irrelevant. All that would be required are the resources, manufacturing, and distribution of the products. Take the automobile. In order to service conventional automobiles today, we have to remove a great deal of hardware before we can get to the engine. Why are they made so complicated? This reason is simply because ease of repair is not the concern of the manufacturers. They do not have to pay to service the car. If they did, I can assure you, they would design automobiles that consist of modular components that could be easily disengaged, thus facilitating easier access to the engine. Such construction would be typical in a resource-based economy. Many of the components in the automobile would be easily detachable to save time and energy in the rare case of repair, because no one would profit by servicing automobiles or any other products. Consequently, all products would be of the highest quality, and they would be simplified for convenience of service. Automotive transport units engineered in this way can easily be designed to be service-free for many years. All the components within the car could be easily replaced when needed with improved technologies. Eventually, with the development of magnetically suspended bearings, lubrication and wear would be relegated to the past. Proximity sensors in the vehicles would prevent collisions, further reducing servicing and repair requirements. This same process would be carried out for all other products. All industrial devices would be designed for recycling. However, the lifespan of products would be significantly increased through intelligent and efficient design, thereby reducing waste. There would be no planned obsolescence, where products are deliberately designed to wear out or break down. In a resource-based economy, technology intelligently and efficiently applied will conserve energy, reduce waste, and provide more leisure time. During the transition, the workweek could be staggered, thus eliminating traffic jams or crowding in all areas of human activity, including beaches and recreation areas. Most packaging systems would be standardized, requiring less storage space and facilitating easy handling. To eliminate waste such as newsprint, books, and other publications, these could be replaced, for example, by an electronic process in which a light-sensitive film is placed over a monitor or TV, producing a temporary printout. This material would be capable of storing the information until it is deleted. This would conserve our forests and millions of pounds of paper, which is a major part of the recycling process. Eventually, most paperwork would no longer be required, i.e. advertising, money, mail, newspaper, phone book. As we outgrow the need for professions that are based on the monetary system, such as lawyers, accountants, bankers, insurance companies, advertising, sales personnel, and stockbrokers, a considerable amount of waste and non-productive personnel could be eliminated. Enormous amounts of time and energy would also be saved by eliminating the duplication of competing products. Instead of having hundreds of different manufacturing plants and all the paperwork and personnel that are required to turn out similar products, only very few of the highest quality would be needed to serve the entire population. In a resource-based economy, planned obsolescence would not exist. Part 5. Motivation, incentive, and creativity. It is claimed that the so-called free enterprise system creates incentive. This may be true, but it also perpetuates greed, embezzlement, corruption, crime, stress, economic hardship, and insecurity. In addition, the argument that the monetary system and competition generate incentive does not always hold true. Most of our major developments in science and technology, have been the result of the efforts of very few individuals working independently and often against great opposition. Such contributors as Goddard, Galileo, Darwin, Tesla, Edison, and Einstein were individuals who were genuinely concerned with solving problems and improving processes rather than with mere financial gain. Actually, very often there is much mistrust in those whose incentive is entirely motivated by monetary gain. This can be said for lawyers, businessmen, salesmen, and those in just about any field. Some may question that if the basic necessities are accessible to all people, what will motivate them? This is tantamount to saying that children reared in affluent environments, in which their parents provide all the necessary food, clothing, shelter, nutrition, and extensive education, will demonstrate a lack of incentive or initiative. There is no evidence to support this fallacious assumption. There is overwhelming evidence to support the facts that malnutrition, lack of employment, low wages, poor health, lack of direction, lack of education, homelessness, little or no reinforcement for one's efforts, poor role models, poverty, and a bleak prospect for the future do create monumental individual and social problems, and significantly reduce an individual's drive to achieve. The aim of a resource-based economy is to encourage and develop a new incentive system, one no longer directed toward the shallow and self-centered goals of wealth, property, and power. These new incentives would encourage people to pursue different goals, such as self-fulfillment and creativity, the elimination of scarcity, the protection of the environment, and the alleviation of suffering in their fellow human beings. People, provided with good nutrition in a highly productive and humane society, will evolve a new incentive system unattainable in a monetary system. There would be such a wealth of new wonders to experience, explore, and invent that the notion of boredom and apathy would be absurd. Incentive is often squelched in our present culture, where a person dare not dream of a future that seems unattainable to him or her. The vision of the future that too many see today consists of endless days of mindless toil, and a wasted life squandered for the sake of merely earning enough money to survive from one day to the next. Each successive period in time creates its own incentive system. In earlier times, the incentive to hunt for food was generated by hunger. The incentive to create a javelin or a bow and arrow evolved as a process supportive to the hunt. With the advent of an agrarian society, the motivation for hunting was no longer relevant, and incentives shifted toward the cultivation of crops, the domestication of animals, and toward the protection of personal property. In a civilization where people receive food, medical care, education, and housing, incentives would again undergo change and would be redirected. People would be free to explore other possibilities and lifestyles that could not be anticipated in earlier times. The nature of incentive and motivation is dependent upon many factors. We know, for example, that the physical and mental health of an individual is directly related to that person's sense of self-worth and well-being. Furthermore, we know that all healthy babies are inquisitive. It is the culture that shapes the particular kind of inquiry and motivation. For example, in India and other areas of great scarcity, there are many people who are motivated not to accumulate wealth and material property. They renounce all worldly goods. Under the conditions in which they find themselves, this is not difficult. This would seem to be in direct conflict with other cultures that value the accumulation of material wealth. Yet, which view is more valid? Your answer to this question would depend upon your frame of reference, that is, your culturally influenced value system. Many experimental psychologists and sociologists have shown that the effects of environment play a major role in shaping our behavior and values. If constructive behavior is appropriately rewarded during early childhood, the child becomes motivated to repeat the rewarded behavior, provided that the reinforcement meets the individual needs of the child. For example, if a football were given to a child who is interested in botany, this would not be a reward from the child's point of view. It is very unfortunate that so many individuals in our society today are not appropriately rewarded for their creative efforts. In some instances, individuals are seemingly able to overcome the shortcomings of their environment, in spite of an apparent lack of positive reinforcements. This is due to their own self-reinforcement, in which they can see an improvement in whatever activity they are engaged in, and achieve an intrinsic sense of accomplishment. Their reinforcement does not depend on the approval of others, nor on monetary reward. Those children who do depend on the approval of a group tend to be afflicted with a sense of low self-esteem, while children who do not depend on group approval usually acquire a sense of self-approval by improving upon their own performance. Throughout history, there have been many innovators and inventors who have been ruthlessly exploited, ridiculed, and abused while receiving very little financial reward. Yet, they endured such hardship because they were motivated to learn and to discover new ways of doing things. While creative individuals like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Beethoven received the generous sponsorship of wealthy patrons, this did not diminish their incentive in the least. On the contrary, it empowered them to reach new heights of creativity, perseverance, and individual accomplishments. This is a difficult concept to grasp because most of us have been brought up with a value system that has given us a set of notions about the way that we ought to think and behave about money and motivation. These are based upon ancient ideas that are really irrelevant today. It has been stated that war generates creativity. This deliberately falsified concept has no basis in fact. It is government financing of war industries that help to develop many new materials and inventions. There is no question that a saner society would be able to create a more constructive incentive system if our knowledge of the conditions that shape human motivation were applied. In this new social arrangement of a resource-based economy, motivation and incentive will be encouraged through recognition of, and concern for, the needs of the individual. This means providing the necessary environment, educational facilities, nutrition, healthcare, compassion, love, and security that all people need. Part 6. The human aspect. In today's society, there is much concern about the dissolution of the conventional core family structure and the societal values associated with it. The family is seen as the primary, most basic venue for acquiring such life skills as caring, sociability, responsibility, stability, and concern for others. The increasing unrest and lack of direction exhibited by many young people today seem to validate these concerns. At present, it is necessary for both husbands and wives to work. Monetary economics have to a large extent undermined family cohesion. Parents lack adequate time to spend with their children, and they are constantly stressed by ever-rising medical bills, insurance payments, educational expenses, and the high cost of living. It is in this area that one of the most profound benefits of this new civilization could be realized. The proposed shorter workdays would provide more time for family relationships. Free access to goods and services would make the home a much more pleasant place, with the removal of economic stress that causes so much family turmoil. With the enhanced level of sociability that would naturally come from not having to compete for access to goods and services, we would see a tendency toward extension of the family unit into the community. As may already be observed in other cultures, the rearing and development of children would become the responsibility of both the family and the community at large. With the elimination of debt, the fear of losing one's job will no longer be a threat. This assurance, combined with education on how to relate to one another in a much more meaningful way, could considerably reduce conflict and stress both mentally and physically. When education and resources are available to all without a price tag, there would be no limit to the human potential. The fear of uniform behavior in a cybernetic resource-based economy of the future is unfounded. The only uniformity one would find would be a concern for the environment and the importance of extending maximum courtesy to all nations and to one another. All would likewise share an intense curiosity for all that is new and challenging. With a better understanding, people could possess a flexibility of outlook unknown in previous times, free of bigotry and prejudice. In addition, the people of this innovative society would have concern for their fellow human beings, and for the protection, maintenance, and stewardship of the Earth's natural environment. Additionally, everyone, regardless of race, color, or creed, would have equal access to all of the amenities that this highly productive culture could supply. In more advanced and humane systems of education, people would acquire this new type of value system. They would also realize the many advantages of cooperation rather than competition. In a society without vested interest, it would be impossible to harness the talents of scientists and technicians to engage in weapons research or any other socially hostile endeavor. We call this approach functional morality. This newer, more humane, and more productive approach would advocate finding non-military solutions to international differences. This calls for a global view, which would be a considerable improvement over narrow national and self-interests. We could use knowledge and information as tools that would be surrendered when evidence of more appropriate methods are introduced. Some people question the morality of seemingly receiving something for nothing. At a recent college lecture, one student was opposed to the idea of getting something for nothing. I then asked him if he were paying his own way through school, or if his parents were paying for him. He admitted that his parents were. I also pointed out that if he really did believe that people should not receive something for nothing, then in the event of the death of his rich relative, he would prefer that their inheritance be left to the heart or cancer fund, rather than being passed on to him. But the student, needless to say, was opposed to this idea. By merely being born in a developed country, we have access to many things that we put no effort whatsoever towards, such as the telephone, the automobile, electricity, running water, etc. These gifts of human ingenuity and invention do not degrade our lives, but rather they enrich and enhance us. What degrades us is our lack of concern for those unfortunate enough to experience poverty, hunger, and homelessness. The social designs that are proposed in this writing merely provide the opportunity for individuals to develop their fullest potential in whatever endeavor they choose without the fear of loss of individuality or submission to uniformity. A resource-based economy by definition includes the participation of all people in its benefits. In a monetary system, there is an inherent reason for corruption, and that is to gain a competitive advantage over someone else. Without vested interests or the use of money, there is no benefit to squelching one's opinion or falsifying information, or taking advantage of anyone. There would be no need for any underlying rigid social barriers that would limit the participation of anyone or restrain the introduction of new ideas. The main objective is the access of information and the availability of goods and services to all people. This would enable people to be prepared to participate in the exciting challenges of this new society. A resource-based economy could create an environment that would encourage the widest range of individuality, creativity, constructive endeavor, and cooperation without any kind of elitism, technical or otherwise. Most significantly, a resource-based economy would generate a far different incentive system, one based on human and environmental concern. This would not be a uniform culture, but one that is designed to be in a constant process of growth and improvement. As we enhance the lives of others, protect our environment, and work toward abundance, all our lives can become richer and more secure. If these values were put into practice, it would enable all of us to achieve a much higher standard of living within a relatively short period of time, one that would be continuously improved. At a time when commercial institutions no longer exist, the necessity for prisons, lawyers, advertisements, banks, and the stock exchange will serve no useful purpose. In the society of the future, in which the monetary system of scarcity has been surpassed by a resource-based economy and most physical and creative needs are met, private ownership as we know it would cease to be a necessity to protect one's access to goods and services. The concept of ownership would be of no advantage whatsoever in a society of abundance. Although this is difficult for many to imagine, even the wealthiest person today would be immensely better off in the highly productive resource-based society. Today in developed countries, the middle class live far better than kings and the wealthy of times past. In a resource-based economy, everyone would live richer lives than the powerful and wealthy of today, not only materially but spiritually as well. People would be free to pursue whatever constructive field of endeavor they choose without any of the economic pressures, restraints, debts, and taxation that are inherent in the monetary system of today. By constructive endeavor, we mean anything that enhances the lives of the individual and others while protecting the global environment. When education and resources are available to all without a price tag, there would be no limit to the human potential. With these major alterations, people would be able to eventually live longer, more meaningful, healthier, and productive lives. In such a society, the measure of success would be based on the fulfillment of one's individual pursuits rather than the acquisition of wealth, property, and power. Part 7. The Venus Project. The Venus Project is an organization that is founded on the ideas, designs, and direction presented here. It represents many years of research and dedication on the part of its originator and project director, Jacques Fresco. Its 25-acre research and design center is located in Venus, Florida, where the future is taking shape today. The function of the Venus Project is to design, develop, and prepare plans for the construction of an experimental city based on the principles outlined above. Here we have constructed 9 experimental buildings, are developing alternative energy systems, city designs, transportation, manufacturing systems, and more. In support of this research, we are creating blueprints, renderings, and models, holding seminars, producing books, videos, and other written material to introduce people to the aims of the Venus Project. The Venus Project is in the process of introducing a set of values and procedures that may enable us to achieve social transformation. The Venus Project will provide the designs and blueprints for a prototype community to test the validity of its social proposals and to establish a permanent planning center that could be used for future short-term and long-term project planning. It also proposes a relevant orientation for people to be able to adapt intellectually and emotionally to our new technological age. Anything short of overall social design would be inappropriate and far less effective. Our proposals will be submitted to the general public and all educational institutions, and we invite their participation. If enough people find the proposals acceptable and choose to join with us in this new advocacy, this could help to form the nucleus of an organization to further the aims of the Venus Project. The circular configurations of the new cities as proposed by the Venus Project are not merely stylized architectural conceptualizations, but are the results of years of research to provide an environment that would best serve the needs of the occupants in an efficient and economical manner. Without sufficient knowledge of the symbiotic interrelationship between humanity and the environment, it would be extremely difficult to develop workable solutions to our many problems. In the planning of this new city, the Venus Project has taken this and many other factors into careful consideration and study. This new experimental city would be devoted to working towards the aims and goals of the Venus Project, which are 1. Conserving all the world's resources as the common heritage of all of the Earth's people. 2. Transcending all of the artificial boundaries that separate people. 3. Evolving from a monetary-based economy to a resource-based world economy. 4. Reclaiming and restoring the natural environment to the best of our ability. 5. Redesigning our cities, transportation systems, and agricultural and industrial plants so that they are energy efficient, clean, and conveniently serve the needs of all people. 6. Evolving towards a cybernated society that can gradually outgrow the need for all political local, national, and supranational governments as a means of social management. 7. Sharing and applying all of the new technologies for the benefit of all nations. 8. Using clean, renewable energy sources such as wind, solar, geothermal, and tidal power, etc. 9. Ultimately utilizing the highest quality products for the benefit of all the world's people. 10. Requiring environmental impact studies prior to construction of any megaprojects. 11. Encouraging the widest range of creativity and incentive toward constructive endeavor. 12. Assisting in stabilizing the world's population through education and voluntary birth control, to conform to the carrying capacity of the Earth. 13. Outgrowing nationalism, bigotry, and prejudice through education. 14. Eliminating any type of elitism, technical or otherwise. 15. Arriving at methodologies by careful research rather than random opinions. 16. Enhancing communication in the new schools so that our language and education is relevant to the physical conditions of the world around us. 17. Providing not only the necessities of life but also offering challenges that stimulate the mind, emphasizing individuality rather than uniformity. 18. Finally, preparing people intellectually and emotionally for the possible changes that lie ahead. Like all other innovative social proposals, it starts out with a few devoted people that dedicate their time to informing others of the humane benefits of this new direction. People are invited to participate in whatever capacity they can to help carry out the initial design phases of this new experimental city. An interdisciplinary team of systems engineers, computer programmers, architects, city planners, sociologists, psychologists, educators, and the like would also be needed. The design of the Venus Project does not regard environmental conditions as fixed or static. We must allow for adaptation and change within the system as a continuous process. This would avoid the tendency to perpetuate temporary arrangements beyond their period of usefulness. The circular city proposed by the Venus Project would be a transitional phase and could evolve from a semi-cooperative money-oriented society to a full resource-based economy. This could be the prototype for a series of new cities to be constructed in various places throughout the world. The rate of progression will depend upon the availability of funds raised during the early stages and the people who identify, participate, and support the aims and direction of the Venus Project. As these new communities develop and become more widely accepted, they may very well form the basis of a new civilization, preferably through the process of evolution rather than revolution. We are well aware that no one can actually foretell the shape of the future. We can only extrapolate on present information and trends. Population growth, technological change, worldwide environmental conditions, and available resources are the primary criteria for future projections. We are also aware that there is no single philosophy or point of view, religious, political, scientific, or ideological, that someone would not take issue with. We feel certain, however, that the only aspects of the Venus Project that may appear threatening are those that others project into it.